This is the first of 2 meetings in August in the summer of the Zoning and Planning Committee. We are meeting tonight, Tuesday, August 15th, and we have at the beginning of the meeting a pretty full house here. I'm Deb Crossley, chair of the committee, and I'm joined on my left Vice Chair, Councilor Vicki Danberg from Ward 6, and Councilor Lyle Baker, Councilor for Ward 7. At the front of the table, Councilor Pam Wright, at large from Ward 3, and then to my left, President Albright, Councilor at large from Ward 2, and Allison Leary, Councilor at large from Ward 1. And do we have Councilor Princeman online?
No, he is not.
He's not online yet. Okay. We are also joined at the beginning of the meeting, let's see, online by...
Hey Bobby, can you put it on speaker so we could both watch it? Actually, no.
Can you mute please if you're observing the meeting, whoever you are?
I don't know if the volume is...
Could you please, can you mute whoever that is?
Yep.
Thank you. And welcome everybody online, and if you are listening in, it would be helpful if you could mute unless you are a counselor or a member of the planning board and you are preparing to speak. Thank you. So there, members of the Planning and Development Board are with us as usual. I can't see everyone who's here, but is Kelly Brown here this evening?
Peter Doringer.
Peter Doringer is here. Peter, can you introduce the members of your committee who are?
Yes.
Was it, no, I thought I saw Amy
So
Danes.
far, Amy Dane is also joining us, and others may join later. Thank you.
Okay, all right, great, terrific. And here in the room, we are joined by members of the stalwart members of the Planning Department, Director Barn Heath, Associate Director Jen Kyra, and Chief of Long Range Planning Zachary Ramel. And Holly Ryan is a member of the committee, and she always sits over there, and I don't see her. My peripheral vision isn't great, so Councilor Holly Ryan, member of the committee, is here with us as well. And Jacqueline Norton is our committee clerk for this evening. And I see we are joined by numerous other councilors. I will list you off as best I can. Councilor Andrea Downs, Chris Markowitz, Bill Humphrey, and Rick, is that Rick Lipoff? I see Rick. I think Rick Lipoff is not here this evening. And Councilor Lucas, Tariq Lucas. So that's all of us at the beginning of the meeting. We are also joined by Andrew Lee, Attorney Andrew Lee from the City Law Department. So with that, we have only one task tonight, but it's a big one. So we barely began last meeting to entertain, to sort of go through the text section by section and entertain a number of amendments. We have about 8 sections as it's been described by the Planning Department. And we have invited councilors and the members of the Planning Board to submit their comments and proposed amendments in advance of this meeting. The Planning Department has assimilated those so that I can take them up by section, and if there are proposed amendments that are similar to one another, we can handle them together for efficiency's sake. I'll say again, for the sake of the public, as we said last time, that this is a normal process we have done before at an interim stage of the project, although we're very far along with this, the design of the Village Center Overlay District. We are still in the midst of our public hearing. We've heard from a lot of people so far, and a lot of groups, and a lot of written testimony as well. And so we're taking these amendments up and we're taking straw votes. as we have done at different stages of the project, in order to get a good sense of where the committee stands, so that the staff can refine the VCOD proposal in time to notice it for the public hearing to continue the second meeting of September. So this meeting, we're hoping to get through all of these amendments. Next meeting, we're gonna be taking up the maps, village by village. And we have also quite a few proposed amendments to the maps. So that's where we are in the process. We have no other business tonight other than this. But if people wanna talk about other aspects of the Village Center Overlay District design process, whatever, I would like to take them up after we go through the amendments, because this is, I'm thinking it's a big task. You can surprise me and we can get it all done in an hour, but I think we have a lot to talk about. And I will read the two items into the record. 38-22, request for discussion and amendments to the zoning ordinance and zoning map regarding village center districts. That's the summary of the item. And 39-22, requesting discussion on state guidance for implementing the housing choice bill. Again, that's the summary of the item. But in our agenda, it made clear we're focusing on revisions to the text, on the text itself, and possibly revisions to the text. So I'm gonna go forward by, I think what I'll first mention is, in talking to staff and thinking this through, I thought we'd take the things up in a particular order. I was thinking that this order might be easier on us in terms of things that we seem to have come to closer agreement on, but I'm still gonna do it by substantive section. I'll list the substantive sections so that, just to give you an idea of how we're gonna move through this. The first subject is the affordable housing bonus proposal. The second is parking requirements. The third is dimensional standards for buildings. The fourth is dimensional standards for sites. The next is allowed uses. After that, design standards for buildings. And after that, design standards for sites. And we have received proposed amendments under each one of these subtopics. Okay? So.
Can I ask a question for clarification?
Yes,
So,
question for
we're
clarification.
going to talk about those that members of the committee have generated. We've received comments from the public on some amendments that have been, but they're not part of this discussion, or they be part of public hearing. What happens to that?
All amendments have come from counselors, but some counselors have been talking to members of the public in different fora, and also because of the testimony we've received. So I'm assuming that a number of our amendments are derived from what we've heard from the public.
Well, that's probably true. It's just that there were specific comments from people in the public. Maybe they are being assimilated by the department you'll deal with them. But I know the architects, for example, sent a long list of comments, or some architects, not all architects. I just want to.
Right.
I don't know how you sort of absorb that, but I'm assuming that's not necessarily part of our conversation tonight. We're talking about what.
Anybody can bring in any relevant testimony that we've heard with respect to the amendments you have put forward. Okay? And of course, amendments are in order, and discussion is in order on each one of these topics.
It'll maybe come out in the wash, so.
Yeah,
okay.
I think it will.
All right.
Coming out in the wash is a good way to put it. I think, we've all heard and seen and absorbed a tremendous amount of information, so, and this isn't the last, our last rodeo. We have another round. Yes, Councilor Wright.
So the Planning and Development Board, Peter Doringer did send in some items too.
Yep.
Are we gonna discuss that?
Yep, they're
Okay.
in the mix. Yep.
Okay.
So the planning board, as always, we're thinking of them and have been, and they've been invited and attending all of our meetings. and invited them to comment. They've been, they have from time to time, sometimes officially, sometimes outside the meeting. But they have to vote on this also, so yes, is the answer. Okay, the affordable housing bonus. We have a two-tiered proposal before us. You want to do a quick summary of that proposal?
Sure. So, I mean, as part of this effort, there was a push to see more affordable housing, the ability to create more affordable housing. And so in the core of village centers, in the core of the village centers in the proposal, which is the VC2 and the VC3 districts, there is a two-tiered bonus system where an additional story or an additional 2 stories could be added on select parcels within the VC2 and VC3 districts, as long as they provide for the 1-story 25% of the units to be affordable per our inclusionary zoning ordinance, and for the option 2, the 2 stories, at least 30% of the units to be affordable. And then the one other thing I'll add is that there are protections built in for when a VC2 or VC3 property abuts a residential district. So really not every parcel can take advantage of this.
Okay,
That's the summary.
thank you very much. Councilor Wright.
One question and then a comment. So the, for the 2 stories, they just can't be within 50 feet. It could be a building that's 100 feet away from residential, but within the 50 feet, they can't have the extra height. Or is that just the 1 story they can have, but not the 2 story? I just want that clarification.
It says that the text is that a VC3 lot adjacent, which a VC3 is the only lot. I mean, VC2 can't take advantage of option 2.
Yeah, but I'm talking about option 1 first.
So within 50 feet, it's the same. They can't take advantage of the height increase.
But after 50 feet, they can take advantage of it.
Correct.
So, and so VC3 can do 1 stories or 2 stories. They can't.
Could do an additional 1 story on 50 feet away.
Yeah.
But if it's
But 2 stories they can't.
2 stories,
Okay.
they can't.
My one question is, you know, our inclusionary zoning is 50 to 80%. Can we, just an idea is we want even more lower affordable housing. You know, we have 25% at option 1, 50 to 80. Can we make it 20% but actually have more lower affordable housing as part of that mix?
Well, this is one of your amendments.
Yes, so we'll take up the amendments in a minute, okay?
Okay.
So if there are any more, there's 2 amendments proposed for this, and I think we should, one we should do first is not that one, okay? Because I think one leads to the other. The first proposal is from Councilors Wright and Albright, is remove option 2 from the bonus. So in other words, we're comfortable, you know, the amendment suggests that we're comfortable with option 1, which would allow 1 story, and if it fits another 2,500 square feet of footprint, if the affordable housing bonus is raised to 25%, affordable housing requirement is raised to 25%, but not the 2-story option. Councilor Albright, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. So I did a study of my own village, Newtonville, to see where option 2 would fit. And I don't have it in front of me, but Zach helped me go through around the map. And there are so few places where it would actually work that it feels to me like it is an option that doesn't really work in very many places, if at all, in some villages. And it creates a lot of angst among our constituents, and for very little benefit, I just would rather get rid of it.
Okay. Councilor Wright, you want to speak to it also?
Well, from my standpoint, I want to get rid of VC3 in most areas to begin with, so I'm looking at lower heights. And in Newtonville, there would be very few places. In Newton Center, about 80% of the lots, the VC3 lots, would be able to take the 2 additional buildings because they're not abutting residential.
2 additional stories.
Stories, I'm sorry, not buildings, yes, stories. But I'm want to lower the heights in general, and that's why I'd like to take out the option 2.
Council Larry?
I agree with Councilor Albright and Councilor Wright's amendment. I would also, I'm more than comfortable with option 1. And for all the reasons that Councilor Albright just stated, I think we should just delete it, option 2.
Okay. Councilor Baker?
So do
Okay. Councilor Gamberg and then Ryan.
I'm all right with the option 1.
And Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, I just don't think the give back's enough on the 2 stories.
And I agree. You know, I don't think because we have so much more to do, I'm not gonna make any sort of statement, but is Councilor Krinsman joining us yet? Oh,
It's
good.
right there, yes.
Councilor Krinsman, have you been able to witness this conversation? You ready for a straw vote?
No, I mean, yes, I've joined, but no, I don't know specifically what we're talking about. I apologize.
Quick summary.
Wait.
First item, first substantive section is about the affordable housing bonus, and the proposal is to eliminate the second tier, which would allow for 2 stories of additional height plus the additional footprint if the affordable housing requirement was raised to 30%, whereas, as you know, the first tier provides 25%, which is also a pretty sharp increase over what we require in our inclusionary ordinance for a single story of additional height. So the proposal is to eliminate option 2.
Okay, thank you. No, I'm not interested in eliminating option 2, but if you could direct me to the page of the ordinance that we're on, that would be helpful.
11,
Can you do that, Zachary?
page 11, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
It's got charts.
Okay, the reasoning given, just in case you didn't hear that either, on the one hand, from Councilor Wright is a concern about height. On the other hand, from President Albright and others is that there's not that much opportunity for the second tier, and given the setback requirements to residential, at least in the area she studied, and it doesn't provide, significantly more affordable housing opportunity. So all those in favor of eliminating option 2, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Okay, that is 7-1. So we're going to, I went at the beginning of the meeting through the substantive sections. I'm not going to do that again, but you'll get it as we're bringing it up. We're taking up amendments relative to the substantive sections, but I'm taking them out of order, hoping that the order I'm doing them in is going to result in a little more efficient discussion based on what the amendments are also. Parking requirements.
Wait, you still got
Oh,
one
I'm
more.
sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, I did. I missed the second one. Okay. Councilor Wright is proposing an amendment that would allow a bonus for a percent of units if providing an even lower, what do I say, a lower
AMI.
AMI, meaning, could we substitute for the average of 65% AMI, say 40 or 50% AMI, but then we would require fewer units at that, understanding they're more expensive. I know the law department has something to say about this, but Mr. Llewellyn, do you want to say something first?
Oh, I don't know if the law department has something to say on this one
okay.
in particular. I think what we would say is that, setting these AMIs was done as part of the inclusionary zoning ordinance. We're just kind of matching what the IZ ordinance already has. And determining what those are requires a bit of work, a bit of analysis, and getting it right. And obviously the market's always changing as well. So we're kind of setting these and then things change over time. I think if you were to move forward with something like this, it would make sense to do it directly within the inclusionary zoning ordinance itself. My understanding, Barney, there's a kind of period where they're gonna be looking at the IZ
I think
ordinance.
next year we're
Next
just.
We'll look
year.
back, yep.
It's kind of required to look at it. So I think doing it as part of the village center zoning is not appropriate. Doing it as part of, the IZ ordinance directly within the IZ ordinance would make a lot more sense.
I just think though, we're gonna pass something at the end of the year versus it's gonna take another year, and I think things will start moving next year. So having it in the zoning, I think would be a good place. And then once we do redo the IZ, we can
Sure.
come take back and look at this and the IZ. But I hate to lose the opportunity.
And we don't have time to do the
Yeah.
analysis, I think is the point they're trying to make.
We don't have the resources right now to do that
But-
analysis.
Well, but what?
Could you do it either or? And so like we could say, average 50% AMI and 20% affordable or something, or what's in there now? And maybe we get something.
Well, I would want to do some sort of analysis, to recommend a number. I also think again, you do these at a moment in time, and I think the market right now, construction costs, materials costs, I think the number would come back in a fairly unfavorable number. If we're saying fully market rate developers are going to be providing these lower AMI units, the analysis might show it's a pretty low percentage that we could require. Because again, we're going to take comps, we're going to take what's going on in the market right now. I think if you can look all around the region, I think people are struggling to build.
But the market rate developer said they can't do this.
One market rate developer said they couldn't do it.
Sure.
Director Heath and then Councilor Albright.
I would just say that the Newton Housing Partnership, that's got some experts in affordable housing, took a very hard look at this and determined that this was just about right in terms of the metric for this. So I would have a lot of confidence in this at this point in time that certainly the folks at the partnership are interested in serving a lower AMI. If they thought that were possible, I think they would have pushed for it.
So, I'll go to President Albright first.
Well, just to add a little bit to what was already said was that when we did this study, when we didn't do the study, your consultant did the study and shared the data with us, we pushed it a little bit harder than the consultant recommended, and I think we were sort of at the very top of anything that the developers were willing to do. So I think doing another study next year will be very informative, and I don't think it's a good idea to do this without a study.
Councilor Weary.
I appreciate Councilor Wright bringing this up because cutting into deeper affordability is important. We do need to serve some lower income folks. However, I don't think this is the appropriate place to do it. I know I've been on the ZAP long enough to know how much hard work goes into the inclusionary zoning ordinance and the studies and what's feasible and what actually can be built. So I would prefer not to have it, and I will not support the amendment. And I think one of the best ways to get more affordable or less expensive housing is to build more multifamily by right and get zoning passed sooner than later. Because depending on the developers to build affordable units is not going to make that much difference in the long run. It's actually market rate apartments that are less expensive that's going to help people.
I'll finish the rest of that. I was gonna just add my 2 cents if I may. So I understand the sentiment. I fully support the sentiment and the interest in finding a way or ways to provide deeper affordability and to serve a lower income population. The sentiment is laudable, but I agree with others who have spoken, with staff and colleagues, that the analysis is really important. We can't just throw something out there and see if it sticks. And I think, it hasn't been that long that we've had the current inclusionary zoning ordinance in place. We're able to apply it to the MBTA community's compliance plan, and of course the rest of the district. I too would like to understand, okay, what's the real trade-off there? If you do the economic analysis and somebody would supply 10 units at a 65% rate, can you ask for 5 units at a 50%, rate, or is it 2 units that you can ask for? We don't have a sense of that. And I think so if we just throw something out there, it's not feasible, it's a waste. And I'd like it to apply to everything that we build. So I don't see the harm in beginning the analysis next year. That's pretty much around the corner. So I am not gonna support this amendment at this time. Are there others? Councilor Danberg and then Ryan.
Just briefly, in the interest of time, I won't repeat what everyone else has said because I agree with everything that has been said so far. What I will add is that what we don't want to do here is to, with the good intention of trying to lower AMI, stop development entirely. Because if the developers cannot afford to do it, they won't build. So we would rather, we've done the analysis on this, the planning department feels that this is a doable number. I prefer to leave it here, and then next year when we have an opportunity to do more analysis, we do it. Thank you for bringing it up, but I'm not going to be supporting it.
Councilor Ryan?
Yeah, I gotta say that there's just not enough real low-income housing or even low AMI housing. And I know a developer recently gave us a few more units in their 40B without, anything and without meeting any quotas. And they were at very low AMI. And I just, Mr. Lamel, the way you said it to me irked me was that you were too much for the developer, and we can't confront the developer, this is me talking now, to see if they can at least do better. And I'm talking workforce and 30 AMI. And I'm sorry, I just have to, I can't, I'm right now on the fence, but I might vote for the amendment, so. That's it.
Okay.
Can I clarify? So I was, not to replace what's there, but give them an option. They can do 25% at 65% AMI and 20% at a different number. And if it's too much of a burden, they're just not gonna build that. But there's an option right now that we may get some 30% AMI units when you do the average of 50% or something like that. So you would have an option, a two-way.
We still need to do the analysis.
We still need to do the analysis to understand what will actually work. I don't think the intention is to try to do it for any particular.
Well, we know that
developers.
it's gonna work at 25%. So
Right.
we know they can choose that. And we could do a quicker analysis or looking at other towns to give another option where we would have that they could choose lower percentage AMI and fewer units.
Okay, we're not gonna get through tonight if we
Okay.
keep doing this. I
Okay.
have 2 people who wanna speak online, and I'm gonna take the member of the committee first, and then I think we do need to vote. Councilor Krinsman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm going to vote against this amendment again. I remember in ZAP when we went through the analysis with planning, I think it was a few years ago at this point, but it was a lot of work and a lot of calculations that they did to make sure that the AMIs worked. I'm actually a little surprised that we need to look at that again because we did it so recently, but that's the process. Rather do it through rather than an amendment here.
Thanks so much. Councilor Krinsman, Humphrey.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago when we went through.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one thing that we've heard in the past is that the particularly deeply affordable units tend to be built by specialist builders who deal with low-income housing tax credits and things like that, which is a very different situation from the mixed market projects where there's some market rate and some affordable housing. So the inclusionary zoning ordinance tends to be geared toward the higher end of the spectrum because that's what works for the mixed market projects. But in order to get more units of deeply affordable housing, it's probably more necessary to do more specialized projects that can qualify for the low-income housing tax credit. That's a better way of doing it and achieving that goal, that policy goal, which I share, than doing it by making small tinkerings with the inclusionary zoning to create a little bonus. Generally, it hasn't been a marginal factor that has been at play with whether or not those units get built. It's been an overall holistic set of obstacles. For example, many of those developers have difficulty when there's a special permit process that's kind of long and ambiguous, and that's a different situation for their type of projects than for the mixed market projects. And that's like, why the Armory project is approached differently than, say, some of these other projects that we've been looking at. So if you're talking about inclusionary, it makes sense to stick with the inclusionary ordinance as is. If you're talking about trying to get a lot of deeply affordable units of housing, that has special requirements that don't have a lot to do with the inclusionary zoning ordinance, and that should be looked at separately, in my opinion. Thank you.
And thank you for that, because it brings up, we do have a municipal affordable housing trust. There are other ways of going about creating more deeply affordable units within a given project. And I'm, for one, hoping to hear from the trust with some of the projects that are on the table or under consideration, that some of the money that they have control over maybe could be used to that end. But I think we need to be voting on this.
Can I just make a
Yes,
comment?
but go ahead, Councilor Baker.
So I understand where the committee's going. I guess I would like to see some note in the public hearing memo by the planning department about this question, simply because there may be some information we get in the public hearing that might change our mind. I do think Councilor Wright's idea that there is an option, not a requirement, is an interesting one, and I just would rather not lose it, even though I don't think there's support in committee now. So thanks.
Well, I think there's not support because of reasons that we,
Everybody, I understand all those reasons.
I think everyone supports the notion and the desire
No,
to
I say
achieve.
support in the committee for an amendment to the
Right.
proposal. And that's- okay.
So the proposed amendment is to allow this bonus for a lower percent of units if providing a lower AMI. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That's 3. All those opposed, nay.
No.
Nay. That's 5. Got that, Jacqueline?
Yes.
Okay, next, parking requirements. I wonder if there's a way to summarize parking requirements, but, other than, some really brief thing, there are 5 amendments being proposed. Right now, the parking requirement is 0 for all proposed districts. We could, just go through the amendments?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's fine. I would just clarify that there's no vehicular parking requirements as proposed. There are bicycle parking requirements for 10 unit projects and above, and for commercial spaces.
Before we go through the items, can we just have a short conversation about the question? Because I think it might be saved time.
About the
Parking.
question of parking,
Yeah.
having an on-site parking requirement?
Right, we have some amendments that are not changing the whole framework, but they're, I think, changing the framework in specific contexts. So I guess the point is that it might be helpful for the department just to summarize the different contexts that a requirement might be required if any of the amendments are passed, and then that might simplify our thought, if that's agreeable.
I'm not sure what you're asking for,
Could
I'm
we-
sorry.
I'm sorry, they're each individual amendment, we could go through them individually,
Yep.
or the department could say they're the summary of different things. For instance, I had one at the margin of the boundary of properties. Councilor Wright talked about, I think the priority streets. Just to understand the landscape of what the amendments are, so that the public and
Want me to
everybody.
read through the amendments, because I will put them together.
Okay, but you have them together and they were all disaggregated, so that's why I just thought it'd be helpful to go through what they are.
Sure.
That's all.
Okay, so there are 2 amendments specific to parking of vehicles. There's 2 amendments specific to parking of bicycles. and there's one proposing to change the parking special permit granting authority to the city council from the planning board. I'm not even sure what that means, but we'll get there.
Yeah, we can get to that if you want.
So I'll read in, because I do want to take up specific parking proposals, but then we can have a general conversation about parking and where this is going. You know, and just to say, I like to think of our, personally, and maybe this would be helpful for others. We have our Village Center Overlay District. It really focuses on the existing business district and overlaying either VC2 or VC3 over our existing business districts. And then the transition zone is immediately abutting residential areas, but it's in neighborhoods that really abut that, which is now the MRT. So I think about them very differently in a lot of respects, and maybe in the respect of parking as well. And I think that kind of goes to one of the amendments too, where Councilor Baker, you are proposing to change parking requirements at the edges. But why don't I read the two parking amendment proposals in here. One is to add, this is from Councilor Wright, add a parking requirement of 0.5 spaces per unit for the mixed-use priority street lots. And the other from Councilor Baker is to require 1 parking space per unit in all VCOD zones waivable by special permit for properties, only for properties that are within 50 feet of a residential zone. So properties within a VCOD zone that are within 50 feet of a residential zone.
Could you just read it one more time?
Yeah, this isn't Councilor Baker's exact language, this is a summary.
Okay.
So this is require 1 parking space per unit in these VCODs, I'm gonna read it a different way, in VCOD zones for properties within 50 feet of a residential zone, which would be waivable by special permit.
So that would mean MRT would require a parking spot
It
per
doesn't
unit.
say that, but I would suggest, that's what made me think about it.
Yeah.
It made me think about MRT as a place where instead of maybe doing this, you know, just have a parking requirement in MRT because it's in the residential zone, and also we know it's not gonna affect, once we're talking about the numbers, we have a lot of room to move with our numbers, but it's not gonna affect the numbers that much.
That's consistent with what I had in mind. I think, but I can comment about the purpose of the exact language is not, you know, something that's.
Question on this, well, do you mean 1 space within the entire MRT plus 50, plus going 50 feet into whatever is next to it?
My concern is the boundary properties in the sense to the residential areas where people are going to look upon the residential areas as their parking opportunity as opposed to the areas of the village commercial core. So it seems to me that there's some protection and I think I like Councilor Crosley's point that the MR is an appropriate place, that this may be appropriate to do that, as well as those particular VC properties which may not be part of the MR but adjacent to a residential zone. They're two different areas, they're not exactly coterminous, so that you have some sense that there's a parking requirement. Now, granted that there may be special circumstances that say, okay, that doesn't make sense, so that's why I put the waiver provision in, because we have that provision now for some of our parking. And I think that, so that's the thrust of the idea. Now, maybe this isn't the right formulation, but the point is to try and have the parking of the properties at the boundary absorbed by those properties rather than have them spill out into the neighborhood.
So there's almost two different things then. I think we're still trying to understand this, and I'll go to Councilor Larry. There's the parking in the MRT zone, right within it.
Yeah, because that's residential itself.
Because that's residential itself. But then you're also talking about the VC2s, there's probably not VC3s, but maybe VC3s that are adjacent to the residential.
And I picked up that theme from the department's other places where they've used the 50-foot as kind of the trigger for some different requirements because of that boundary issue. So I think the whole thrust of it is to try and make sure that the edges are softened, so to speak, of the impacts. And then also that the MRTs, which you pointed out quite properly, I wasn't quite sharp enough to pick that up myself, which is that the MRTs ought to be part of that because they're in the neighborhoods themselves already.
Okay, so I think we probably should, when we get to voting, we should probably vote those two things separately, is my thinking, because they're somewhat different.
Raise one more thing?
Sure, go ahead.
I think we would push to treat the adaptive reuse in MRT differently. So that may be something to think about
In what
when
way?
you're voting. Well, if we really want to encourage preservation of existing homes and reuse, parking is, as we saw when we did those case studies at the last meeting, is often difficult to provide. So I think we would recommend exempting the adaptive reuse from a parking requirement.
Okay, I'm wondering if we need to get into site requirements before we're gonna be able to, some of the dimensional standards requirements for buildings and sites before we'd be able to understand that? No, you think,
I think
you
we can
don't?
do that separately when we get to those sections.
Or maybe we'd wanna go back to it depending on what we learn. Okay, Councilor Lear.
I think this, Councilor Baker's amendment is needlessly complicated. And remember that, parking will get built. It's not gonna mean that no parking will get built. I am in favor, actually, of allowing a parking space per unit in the MRT zones. It's gonna happen anyway. I would support that. And I just think this is, when you live next to Boston College, that's what comes to mind, is the kids that start roaming into the residential areas and parking their cars. That's what your discussion reminded me of. And I think it's much easier to just require some parking, reasonable parking in residential zones are very different from commercial centers anyway. So I treat them very differently. So I will not be supporting the amendment.
Well, you can support that part of the amendment, but,
Also.
so we're gonna vote it in two pieces. You'll support, that's what I'm hearing you say.
Yes,
Okay, but not within 50 feet
yes.
in the DC. Okay, I'm hearing that. Councilor Baker, do you wanna respond or?
No, let other people talk and then come back to it. Because
Okay.
I think what you've got is in effect, two different proposals now,
Right.
just to be clear.
Both of which go after some parking requirement. I have two hands online again. I'll go to Councilor Krinsman first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to be supporting the addition of any parking requirements. So in that respect, I'm still, as I have been for the previous, 73 discussions that we've had on this topic, opposed to parking minimums. The point is well taken about softening the edges of the commercial districts, before the residential zones. But I actually think that's exactly what the zoning map does by, sort of lowering down the requirements, maybe moving into an MRT district. I think that's built in to the map. And if there are areas where it's not built into the map, then that's, I think, to be discussed at our next meeting. So I'm a no on this. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilor Downs.
You won't be surprised to know where I land on this. However, I want you to consider there are many properties where the land is scarce, the building is big, it could be reused, but we can't do that if we require parking. But on the other hand, if you want to keep the building and do not require parking, we are talking within, a short distance of public transit and services. And there, if we are doing a tear down or something like that, then yeah, you'll find ways to fit in the parking, but I don't think we should be in the business of mandating it and forcing what in this case are mostly small developments to try to find places to pave. I think we should just leave that to part of their calculations. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Can we take this in two votes? Oh,
And then mine will be the third one.
Sure.
Well, yeah, I know Jen here talked about the adaptive reuse, but I think from a planning department perspective, we would not recommend requiring parking within any of the BCOD zones. I I think when it comes to the core districts of BC2 and BC3, if you want to soften the edges, I think not requiring parking and allowing a developer to provide open space instead of parking would be a really good way to soften the edges, in addition to the step downs and the increased setbacks that we have into the code. If you require the parking, you will get more paving. In MRT, it's the same thing. It will artificially increase the size of the lot, which will increase the cost of development. If you want cheaper units, you should not require parking. If you want more green space, you should not require parking. So the recommendation, I think, from the planning department is to still not require parking. I think, as Councilor Crossley said, requiring one space per unit in MRT can be done. Again, the recommendation is to not require parking.
Hear you. Okay, thank you. Councilor Wright.
One thing we've mentioned is if we require it or don't, they will build it. And right now, in the zoning, there's no non-operational green space. So right now, the way it is, they can pave the whole lot. They have the house and they can pave the whole lot and put it on there. So they're going to do it anyways. I do think we should make an exemption for adaptive reuse, because that's something I really want to push and want. And instead of having tear downs, to have adaptive reuse. But otherwise, I would support for the MRT, one unit or one parking spot per unit, except for adaptive reuse.
Councilor Baker?
Yeah, I just want to clarify, soften the edges is my term, but I don't think, what I'm thinking about is soften the impacts, not just the visual feel. And that's the department's point of view is valid and legitimate. What I'm trying to be concerned about is not having the people who are actually living in these units park on the adjacent, not in the spaces which are available to them. So that's why it seems to me an appropriate intervention. But if we take a straw vote on both things, remember my other proposal is waivable. It's not just that it's an automatic, because who waives it is another issue, but it's just but Councilor O'Leary has indicated she doesn't like more complexity. I understand that. I think that, but this is a case where two different ideas are in play, and we ought to at least discuss them and decide what we do. But I don't want to hold on to the discussion. I think that the policy is clear.
Okay. Councilor Bamber, and then I think we need to structure a vote.
And one thing that we don't want to do is when you're very close to public transportation, people will not have cars, which some people in my neighborhood do because we're very close to the T. You don't want to require paving that then remains empty.
So, I've heard actually three things now. So, one is whether or not we require parking in the MRT zone. And I say at one space per unit. Within that, the second thing is, should we require something different for adaptive reuse? Maybe a lower number or nothing. And maybe we need a little discussion on that. And the third is whether or not to require parking within 50 feet of an MRT zone or a residential zone. I'm gonna say that we should vote on the last one first, and then maybe have a little more discussion on the MRT about the adaptive reuse. You think we should just, okay.
Very short, this should be very short.
Okay. All those in favor of requiring one space per unit within, for a VC property, which is with a VC2 or 3 property, let's be specific, that is within an existing or proposed residential zone.
Within 50 feet, right?
Waivable by special permit.
Right, I understand, at one space per unit,
Right.
but waivable by special permit.
Yeah.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
Nay. I think it's 1-7.
No.
Okay, so anybody have anything else to say about the MRT zone and new builds versus Councilor Albright?
So I have a question for the planning department. If you have an MRT that gets developed and people have cars, but they don't plan any parking spaces, Where do those people park?
Probably on the street, same as the single-family homes that don't have parking spaces on site or have more cars than they have parking spaces.
So this will depend on getting rid of the winter parking ban.
Well, they would do the same thing that the people do today, right? Is they park on the street during part of the year and they park in municipal lots at times. I mean, I think for most people, if you're moving into a new build, you're going to build parking because the people who are going to be moving there are going to expect that. Maybe there's some cases, small units right by the T, you don't know. But we see that today with existing single-family homes. We have a lot of single-family homes where there are more cars than parking
I
spaces
can
on
vouch for
site.
that.
Or they're gonna build it anyway, if the lot's big enough.
Yeah, well, I hear, maybe it's because of my interest in getting rid of the ban, I hear from a lot of people who move to Newton, they moved to a multi-unit building, and they thought they had a parking space, but find that they didn't. And, you know, what am I supposed to do, Counselor Albright?
Which sounds
more
like a
attention.
realtor is
Yeah.
maybe at fault
Yeah.
there.
And, you know, if the winter parking ban is, you know, if the winter parking ban stays in place, then people will figure it out. They won't bring a car, or they'll find another space they can rent
Okay,
somewhere.
okay, that's fine.
That happens today.
Okay. I'll do this backward.
Can we continue to vote?
I'm gonna do two votes.
Okay.
First,
I would just want to comment on that if I could.
oh, please go ahead.
So I still think that this is a part of, you know, certainly the adaptive reuse, but again, we want to try and have the impacts absorbed on site. I don't think we should create a situation where we're putting people into the situation where they have to make that choice. And, you know, it was very interesting just listening to tonight on coming over here, an analysis by someone about the importance of the vehicle. I know this is heresy these days, but for the vehicle for people, especially low income, to be able to do things, it's not just that cars are, you know, not inherently evil. They are part of what gives economic opportunity to people and mobility and all sorts of things. So I think we should provide adequately for them, and that's why I think the space is legitimate. It's a trade-off. Granted, you may can say I can get a few more units, maybe, but I do think the question here, when we have a margin of safety, so to speak, in the numbers that the MBTA is being set up, that there's value in taking the MRTs and having a parking space so that we can try and minimize the spillover impacts into the community. So that's, I've said my piece, I mean, you all can just vote on it.
I'm not gonna rebut that, but I could, and it's so everything we've discussed for months and years already about, you know, parking, what happens when you require parking. So it's a whole new discussion, and I just don't agree with your take on it. Because you can't understand why someone wouldn't ever have a car. It's a changing world now where if people get around in a lot of different ways, and poorer people who can't afford cars really benefit from options to having a vehicle and options to live in an area where they can walk, where they can bike, where they can get around, take public transit. So it's not an
You're gonna
economic.
have places for that to happen.
Okay.
Okay.
We're gonna vote on this, okay?
Yes,
Okay.
let's just keep voting.
So let
Don't
me,
get
I know.
confused.
Yes. So,
We'll answer tonight.
okay. The first vote I'm gonna take is who agrees, who approves of maintaining a zero parking requirement for those who choose an adaptive reuse option in the MRT zone?
Shouldn't we vote the other way first? Because if we're voting for no parking requirements, then.
But the other question is, who's gonna vote to increase the parking requirement from 0 to 1 space per unit in the MRT?
Yeah, that's what we should vote on first. Because if we
And then-
vote 0, then we don't have to worry about the adaptive reuse, right?
No, we're gonna either vote for one, you're either gonna vote yes or no, oh, I see, so if it fails, okay.
Yeah.
Alright, well,
This
I'll do what the
discussion
committee
is gonna eat
wants.
the time
If
we've
the
saved.
committee wants it, alright, we're spending too much time deciding how to vote this. Let's, so, in the, who is in favor of requiring 1 on-site parking space per unit in the MRT zone? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No? Nobody else? Okay. That's 3. Who is opposed to requiring 1 space per unit in the MRT zone? So what's a nay? So.
Oh, nay.
No, you don't
Right.
want to.
Oh, no, in the MRT, I thought you said adopted,
No, okay. Counselor Crispin, Leary, Albright, Danberg, Ryan. Okay, so it's, 5, I'm counting my, no,
3 to
I'm
5
voting
fails.
for requiring 1 space per unit in the MRT zone, because I don't think it makes any difference. I think they're gonna build it
I
anyway.
agree with you, I totally agree with you.
But you didn't vote with me.
No, I'm not gonna vote.
There
for
you go, that's
I
fine.
agree, it's gonna get built, doesn't really matter how you vote.
I get it,
I support Councilor Leary, she's 100% right.
yeah, I hear you, I hear you, trying to be, here we go. All right, so, we're not gonna make any change, so we're not going to need to exempt the other. Okay, you read the room better than I did. Okay, now, Councilor Wright has also proposed that we add a parking requirement of 0.5 spaces per unit where we are requiring mixed use on our priority streets. This is probably a moment where I should mention something. So the state is getting very close to allowing us to count the residential units above mixed use. DHCD and has hosted a meeting with stakeholders. It included the new housing czar, Augustus. It included CHAPA, who have been opposed to this. It included our own Greg Reedman, Chamber of Commerce, and others. And Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll has really been pushing for this, and how it was discussed was that they want to get out ahead of the legislature trying to make amendments to the law, and instead make amendments to the regulatory framework. There has not been an announcement, but one of the conditions that there's several conditions discussed, and the planning department, please, you can weigh in as you want, and if I forget anything, but 2, one is they're gonna limit the number of units and or the area that we may, where we may require, what we're calling priority streets, mixed use. 2 is we may not require parking for the, as I heard it, for the retail, for the commercial space, okay? So I just wanted to put that on the table. It is not 100%, so nobody can say, this is happening, we can't make an announcement. I wish I would hurry up. But this meeting happened over a week ago, and that's what DHCD was presenting to these people. This is what we want to do. So, to the degree that that impacts anything that is coming next, so Councilor Wright is proposing that there, for some reason, you can explain it, why you want a half a space per unit where we are identifying mixed-use priority streets.
The reason for that is I think it's important to meet the MBTA 8,330 units, and having no parking requirements does make a difference. I'd like to, and we know some of that parking will be built, and so I'd like to keep it at 0, and I'd like to play with the numbers other ways where a lot of people in the villages would like to see lower heights, so, moving places, VC3, things like that. But priority streets are not counted in the 8,330 or the 10,000 that's there. And so
But it looks like they're going to be, that's my point.
well, this is the reason why I put it there. Basically, you can do whatever you want there because they're not counted towards that. Because I wanted special permit down to 10,000 square feet in those areas and half a parking and having a different type of zoning. Now, I would go along at this point, assuming that it's going to happen, but when it comes back to the final count or whatever, and it doesn't happen, I'd like to change the vote, but to move this along, I'm willing to just continue on.
What does that mean?
I will
You want to
withdraw
withdraw
it.
the amendment for the
Yeah,
moment.
and I'm assuming that,
And if this happens, or if this doesn't happen, you might put it back on the
Yes.
table. Got it, okay. Amendment withdrawn, thank you. Okay. Mark this up.
I had one question in there.
Yeah.
The applicable to parking design standards was removed from one version to another.
Can we go to design standards for that?
No, it was under the parking requirements.
Sorry?
It was under 2.6.C.1, which is under parking requirements. And between the two versions, you removed the applicability in there, and I was wondering why that happened and why not keep it in.
We can maybe ask Attorney Lee, but I think there was a redundancy here at the beginning, in the beginning of the overlay district, there's an applicability section, and so essentially that then carries through the rest of the zoning. So this idea of having, lower sections of it saying applicability were somewhat redundant. But if I misstepped, we can ask the attorney.
No, Zach described it pretty well, and keep in mind, Councilor Wright, we're still in the process of cleaning this up in terms of just drafting. That's one drafting piece with regards to having applicability and what takes precedence throughout the proposed ordinance. That's one item that we have on our notes that just needs to be addressed and cleaned up and made sure that it's not redundant, repetitive unnecessarily.
Okay, all right. I'd like to try not to take up things like that tonight and just really stick to these substantive sections. But it is important to understand that cleaning up is going on continuously. Bike amendments, Councilor Rado recommended that we remove all bike parking requirements. On the other hand, Councilor Wright recommended that we add electric bike requirements specifically. I'll mention, and I think the planning department can confirm this, that their intention during the cleanup is to greatly simplify and reduce the volume of the bicycle requirements section, but not to eliminate it. And then can you speak to
Maybe
the
unicycles instead of bikes?
Name every kind of bike you could
Just
possibly
the
think of.
wheel thing.
And so I think all of us think, 2.5 pages of particular bike requirements is over the top.
Yeah.
So we're gonna let them do that work and see the revised draft. And can you speak to the notion of adding electric bike requirements?
So we looked into this one, and it just doesn't seem that there's any specific requirement or addition that would be that would make sense for electric bikes. The amount of space that's needed is the same. The outlet is a building code thing, and they don't need to require a special charger like an electric vehicle does. And so we just weren't sure what specific things we could add to the zoning.
So my concern is just like electric cars, you have, places for that they can charge. And so for electric bikes on bigger buildings, I think there should be a place for them to charge, otherwise they would need to bring them into their apartments.
I think the point is that code requires outlets every 12 feet or so there's some number. And so there would be, it only requires a regular household level electric outlet to charge a bike.
But if it's a garage or open garage, I don't think you have outlets every 12 feet, so they need to designate a room. A room requires every 12 feet for an electric outlet. So designating more of a room versus an open air garage, I don't think they have outlets every 12 feet.
Can you just look into that, Dan?
Good.
Can I comment on that?
Yes, please.
I'm an EV bike owner, enthusiast, and actually, I don't know if we need to require it, but I will tell you that EV bikes are heavy. If you're living in a multi-use building, a multi-unit building, it's difficult to carry it upstairs. They're pick up a little bit more space usually, and they can be expensive, so you want to make sure it's secure parking. Whereas a regular bike, you can actually hang from the wheel and it take, so you could have some areas where those bikes would take very little space and leave a little more bike for electric bike parking. It's an interesting concept. I'm not sure if we can regulate that via zoning, but it certainly would be a really nice thing to offer, amenity to offer for building owners, developers. What's that?
Will they build it anyway?
I do think
They
they
might,
will.
they may build it anyway, because
I don't think
actually I was
everyone-
riding my bike from work into a medical appointment and I went around back. I didn't want to park my bike on the street on just one little thing, because it's an expensive bike and so there was covered biking in the back.
So why don't
So I
we
went
look
around.
into code requirements for uninhabitable spaces like garages and storage rooms and so forth, and make sure that we're accommodating this. Okay, so, good. I think, do we want to entertain an amendment to remove all bike parking requirements? And can I just quickly say?
No.
Do we want to remove all bike parking requirements? We have two off-committee folks on, Counselor Downs and then Maliki. Oh, Counselor
Hi, yeah,
Laredo's
I wanted
here.
to,
Okay, may I take
speak
Counselor
up.
Laredo first, because it's his
Oh,
amendment, I
sure.
didn't know that
It's
he
his
showed up.
amendment.
Counselor Laredo, would you like to go first?
I'd be happy to, Madam Chair. So I want to be crystal clear here. This is not against bikes. I have a bike, I ride my bike, I like my bike. But if we are making a collective determination that we ought to let developers decide what they do with their property in regard to cars, for example, which seems to be the collective consensus of this group to do that, then I don't understand why we then are going to insist that you must provide certain levels of bike parking. If it is something that a developer feels it needs to do to promote its project, it will do so. I would have no problem if we tell a developer that they're going to provide any parking, they must provide a certain amount of parking that is has a chargeable for charging, electric charging, and I would be fine with the requirement that if they're going to include bike parking, that a certain percentage of it must be available for electric charging. But absent that, it's a philosophical issue more than anything. Here we are trying to say to developers, we're trying to regulate you less, but then we're coming in and saying, well, but here we want to regulate you a lot more. And I think if there's any place the market can dictate what's going to happen, this is it. We have no idea as a collective group how much bike parking we ought to be providing for various residents. And I just don't know how we're going to make that decision at all. So I'll leave it at that. I don't feel particularly strongly about this, to be clear. If it's the will of the council that we included, fine. I just don't see it as being consistent with everything else we're talking about. And again, I want to be crystal clear. I like my bike. It's more a matter of telling developers what they must do and embedding it in a zoning code, which just doesn't make sense to me given everything else we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Downs?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to support the idea of electric bike parking and wanted to throw into the consideration the real dangers of the batteries catching fire. It's rare, but we've been seeing more of them. So we need to, when we're thinking about electric bike parking, we may want to take into account what future code may be and ask that it be, separated from living areas and first floor, like Councilor Leary said. And I think our goals here are partly environmental, and that's why bike parking requirements do make sense. They also don't take up a ton of room unless you're talking cargo bikes, and that's a whole nother kettle of fish. But I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Maliki?
Yeah, thank you. Just following up on that, which is what I wanted to talk about as well. One of the problems with the electric bike charging is that the reason for, I think, some of the recent fatal fires in New York City and other apartment fires, I think it was Malden or someplace around here, the bike may be heavy, so they don't take the bike up to the apartment, they take the battery up to the apartment and charge it. And, you know, if they go to sleep and the thing overcharges or whatever, it's a bad aftermarket battery, that's when the fire starts. So if you're gonna have electric bike, so that's, I guess that's an argument for having a dedicated, safe place for electric bike charging. And I don't know if you can do it now because I don't think in the Massachusetts building code yet, but yeah, you know, New York City, they're starting to require, or individual buildings are requiring sort of concrete fireproof rooms for the electric bike charging. So if there was any way to do that or allow for that possibility, I think that would be advisable. I'm kind of agnostic on the whole question of bike parking in general being required. I understand Councilor Laredo's logic there, but just be aware of the risks of the charging. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Krinsman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if Councilor Laredo stepped away or just turned off his camera, but I want to say that I largely agree with what Councilor Laredo said, and I would be fine eliminating parking minimums either for bicycles or automobiles, just because I do agree that the market will dictate and developers will build what is needed. I would support a requirement that if building is constructed, either automobile or bicycle, that a certain percentage of that be electric or capable to handle electric vehicles or bicycles. That I think would make sense, but I would definitely support an amendment to remove all of those minimums.
Okay. Well,
I think Mark has his hand up.
Councilor Laredo, do you want to speak again? We're trying to move through this. We're ready to vote, I think.
Oh, no, thank you, Madam Chair. I left my hand up accidentally. And I'm
Okay.
still here, Councilor Krinsman, and thrilled that you agree with me.
Great. Okay, so we have,
Can I just say that I'm thrilled that he's thrilled that I agree with him?
no, you may not.
Well, the
Okay.
Mutual Admiration Society.
Move on. Okay, we have a lot to go. So we have a proposal to remove all of the bike parking requirements. Barking, and all of the barking requirements from the text. Understanding that we understand that if we keep them, they're going to be dramatically simplified. But at the same time, if parking is required, or whether or not it's required, we have a proposal to make special accommodations for electric bike parking, which needs some looking into, because we have to look into what the code requirements are for electrification of garage spaces and other storage type of spaces that are not habitable. So I don't know, I think we can get a sense of the committee on that one. So in terms of adding provisions for electric bicycle parking, and understanding the safety and charging requirements related to it, is the sense of the committee that that is a good idea.
Yes.
All of
Yes.
us, yes, okay, I agree. And a separate vote. Who's in favor of removing all of the bike parking requirements from the text? All those in favor, please say aye.
Although I'm willing to see the simplified version of what planning comes up with. It may be much more acceptable. So at the moment, I'm an aye.
You're a qualified aye?
That's right. I'm a very qualified aye.
We have one
Definitively
qualified.
qualified.
We have two qualified ayes, depending on what the planning department comes in. Okay.
Make it three. Make it three.
I just want to
come on.
comment on the prior point, though. I think Councilor
Dan
Bender had once talked about how garages used to be separated because you were at the risk of fire. And now the past has come around again.
Well, the code requires significant fire separation between garages and living spaces, or garages and commercial space, garages and anything. Yeah, so if the electric bike parking is in a garage, there's a fire separation of 2 hours required, or some such thing. I'm not up on commercial, but So I think the issue is if they're allowed to. It's might need to be part of the condominium documents or the rental agreement that, you may not store batteries in your apartment. See how that works. I don't know that we can do anything about that, but.
Well, I can't charge my battery separate, I have to charge it with the whole bike, so.
Yeah,
maybe
okay.
there are- remember, there's a lot of other types.
Technology on this is moving so
Yeah.
fast.
And it's not just bikes anymore, it's scooters and unicycles and.
Okay.
All right,
I
guys.
go on a tiny bit, I get pushback, other people go on for I don't know how long. Okay, everyone has to speak 100 words fewer.
I agree.
Thank you for
No
saying
repetitions
fewer.
are allowed. Okay, folks, we have one more under parking requirements. Council Laredo is asking us to change the parking special permit granting authority to the city council from the planning board.
For bicycles?
I think we're talking about vehicles here. Can we just vote on this?
Sure.
Can you just repeat that one more time? I was so
Council
laughing.
Laredo is proposing that we change the special permit granting authority for parking requirements, a waiver of whatever, to the city council from the planning board. Actually, I'm gonna ask the planning department, can you tell us what in the text, remind us what in the text gives the planning board the authority to waive parking requirements? And why would we, because we're not asking for any?
So right now, in the current ordinance, there's a blanket special permit waiver provision for parking. So in our existing ordinance, anything in the parking section can be waived. And that's dimensional standards, number of stalls, lighting, screening,
Right,
et cetera.
in our existing ordinance.
We carried that forward in this version. And with zero parking, it's far less relevant. But you may see it for waiving dimensional standards, parking is provided, or loading requirements, or something else that's in the parking section. We have something about alternative compliance for bike parking,
Correct.
right? As technology advances or changes. So there's very few instances we would expect to see a special permit, but there is a waiver provision there.
Okay, ready to vote? Comment? Do we have a comment?
Well, the
Okay,
city
go ahead,
council does
Council.
this now, and this would be a special change for this kind of ordinances, right? So I don't wanna make a special change if we're gonna have the waiver, I just would keep it where it is. So I'll support the amendment.
Yeah, and the same with me, I would support it because we're an elected body versus a mayor appointed body. So I'd like to keep it where it is,
So this means that every parking waiver has to go through city council?
which it does now.
This
But
is
it's the
change.
only thing that would go through, because otherwise everything would be by right.
Yeah.
So,
It's gonna be very.
we're not requiring any parking at the moment, but that could change by the time we get to full council, right?
But it happens now, it all gets.
We understand,
Yeah.
Special permit.
but
Yeah.
we're trying to minimize special permits. Well, some of us are, maybe not all of us are. Okay, ready to vote? All those in favor of changing a special permit granting authority to waive parking to the city council?
Can I be heard on that, Madam
Oh,
Chair?
sure, I didn't see you, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councilor.
My request, I'd like the opportunity to speak to it.
Of course, I just didn't see you, just go ahead.
So, I do not understand why this body feels compelled to take away from its authority and give authority to a board that's completely appointed by the mayor. And that's not a negative on the mayor who is currently in office, but it's an issue of a balance of power. This is a ready city where the administration has tremendous authority. I have served on the land use committee now for 12 years, including chairing it for several years. I see no reason whatsoever that the land use committee and the city council can't continue to handle these types of issues. If there's a problem with it, then maybe we create a body like traffic council, which is under the control of the city council, but delegating to a subset of individuals, including those from the public, a member of the city council, the administration. but to simply cede this to another body controlled by the mayor with no oversight on our part, I think is a huge mistake. And again, nothing negative about the Planning and Development Board at all. But we are the folks who are accountable to the residents of the city, period. And I happen to think that accountability is very important, both in large and small decisions, and enables us to do a better job. We don't hold anything back. There will be absolutely no delays in anything by keeping it within the special permit authority. So I would urge us to retain this approval process, and if there's any change to be made, it should be to some kind of subset of this body, such as a traffic council, and not to an entity controlled by the administration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we're ready to vote on the committee. Understanding that at the moment, the committee has voted not to require any parking on any of these zones. Again, that could change over the course of time, but all those in favor of giving the giving the authority to provide special permit waivers for parking to the city council instead of the planning board, please say aye.
Aye. Aye. That is meaningless. It's a meaningless vote, I think.
None of these votes are meaningless?
No,
They are,
this-
they are, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna push back on that. None of these votes are meaningless. It is directing the planning department as to how to move forward. So we're gonna have a tie vote on this, I believe. All those in favor of changing that for the by right projects in the BCOD, who might, if we require parking, ask for a waiver. All those not in favor, please say aye. Aye. That's 4-4.
So it doesn't pass because it doesn't have enough votes.
I know.
But let's be clear that the whole amendment that this is a part of is amending the current zoning to add the overlay. So if we get to a tie vote on that, it fails and stays in the city council because the whole package is an amendment. That's just right. You're talking about what should the planning department present as far as the continued amendment to the zoning ordinance. That's really what the whole process is designed to do, is to
Correct.
reshape that document.
Correct.
But ultimately, that still is an amendment which requires affirmative 13 votes. If it came out as 12-12, even though, you know, this particular change would not change the current rule, it would stay in the city council. I just want to make that procedural point because I think there are two different things that people can get confused about. We're talking about what should be the shape of the document that goes forward out of this committee.
Understand.
Is that clear?
Yeah, understand, and we'll make that clear going forward. I think that's important too. President Albert.
I just feel like I need to add this because I didn't know that the vote would be this close, but you know, I spent 12 years on the land use committee and it was an awful lot of fun. I really kind of enjoyed it. But if you talk to 85% of the cities and towns in the United States of America, they will say Newton's problem is that the city council is the land use granting permission authority. And I understand why they say that, because everything takes longer. So I'm sorry I didn't say it earlier. I don't know who, if I might have convinced, but the land use committee really doesn't belong we're staying in it, obviously, for the large projects, but it's probably not a good idea.
I just respectfully disagree.
I know.
Yeah, we know.
Let's move on.
Right. All right, we are going next into dimensional standards for buildings. And we have 9 proposed amendments. Planning department, do you want to summarize?
Well, I think the summary here,
section?
sure, I think the summary here is that there's kind of a set of standards that are setting the general mass of the building, and then there are additional design standards that then refine that. So I think particular for this section of dimensional standards, we're really talking about the 4 sub-districts and the maximum footprint, the maximum height in feet, and the maximum number of stories. Those are really the 3 things we find out here. Everything else related to it and how the building gets shaped and chiseled at are the design standards, which are in the coming section.
Or site standards or things like setbacks and where the building is
Correct, yes,
placed
sorry.
on the lot.
Correct.
So what is minimum lot size, of that?
The dimensional standards for sites, not the next section.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna take one up first because, although it's proposed as an amendment by 3 people, Councilors Wright, Albright, and Laredo, I think we've really very much agreed in the committee on this particular one. The amendment proposed is to reduce the maximum height allowed in MRT to 40 feet.
For pitched roof
For
buildings.
pitched
Sorry,
roofs
yeah.
in MRT. MRT only allows pitched roofs. And to reduce the maximum height to the peak of the roof to 40 feet. We've talked about this a number of times in committee, so I'm hoping we don't need to talk about it at all, and we can just go to a vote.
We've already incorporated this
And
change
it's-
in previous versions that we've been
Right.
showing recently.
Okay? All good? Great. All those in favor of this, please say aye. Aye. Good. Did I get Councilor Krinsman? I think he stepped away.
Sorry, I was muted, yep.
Okay, you got it. Okay, so that's unanimous. So next, we have 2 on VC 1. From Councilor Wright, we have reducing the maximum footprint, reducing the metrics. So from 4,000 to 3,000 square feet. And then I have been thinking a lot about VC 1 and talking with planning and Vice Chair and President Albright, and I would like to propose eliminating VC 1 entirely. And we can, so if that doesn't go through, the council, I mean, I'm happy to speak to it a little bit, then obviously Councilor Wright's amendment would be taken up next. How's that?
What would, that would be fine, VC 1 would be eliminated, and what would it become?
What it has become. So, you know, we got a design for the transition zone from the team, you know, during version 1. The transition zone was envisioned as what we're now calling, what we called then and are calling now VC 1. We pretty much replaced all of those areas with the MRT zone because there was a general feeling that, you know, this isn't working. And that it's too big, it's clunky, it's not a good transition. And then the design for MRT is completely different, as we know. It's offering 2 options, it's incentivizing adaptive reuse, there's a real focus on protecting the scale of development in the adjacent neighborhoods. I think we're all much happier with that. But then VC 1 was laid down along Route 9. We got a number of comments from others and within the committee that people felt it doesn't work very well along Route 9 either. It was put there to help with contiguity when we knew we had to build one district that was 50% of the land area of what's required for MBTA communities. But it's been pointed out very clearly that access to Route 9 is poor, limited. We don't want to create new curb cuts onto Route 9. If there's not a side street, how do you access these properties and which would accommodate more units? And do we really need it? So, and could we, if we need it for contiguity along Route 9, so this is a textual thing because if we're eliminating a whole zone, it comes out of the text, but then we can look at the maps. So if we need to replace some of it, why can't we use the MRT? The MRT abuts it in many cases if we need, if it's a, there's some places along Route 9, it's been pointed out by a number of councilors that aren't walkable either. So why don't we just eliminate those sections from the map, but we'll get to that when we get to the map. But in looking at the map and considering the metrics that we've never really been happy with for VC1, why don't we just get rid of it? Councilor Wright?
So 2 things, and we need to look at the map. I could see just doing VC1 into MRT, so then you have be contiguous. The other thing is, the VC1 lots probably 80% of them are providing 10 to 18 units in the count towards the MBTA Communities Act. And so that's a big chunk, a good chunk.
It is.
And so that would affect our numbers versus just 4 units. So there's that
There is
too.
that. In fact, you told me, I asked you how many units, it's approximately 2,000 units in the VC1 district. Obviously, if you replace it with MRT, or putting a few hundred back maybe, but that's it. So it's not doing us any favors, because it's gonna be difficult to make it work in that location. And we don't need the unit count at the end of the day anyway. And we're proposing next year, or as a next effort in following all of this, to re-examine our commercial corridors and, you know, re-examine the zoning that pertains to them. You know, did a lot of work along Washington Street, but not Union Street or Route 9.
Question, so you're proposing that we essentially replace VC one with MRT everywhere? Is that what you're saying?
No, because so sort of.
Okay.
So when we get to the maps, I guess we decide what to put there. But at the moment, I'm proposing to eliminate it as a district from the text. And then, yeah, when we get to the maps, we would have to replace some of it for the
Point
contribution.
of information on that. If planning department, if the state allows us to count, units above, retail, how many might that add back?
We don't have that, we might be able to have that number before the next meeting. We don't have that number right
I
now.
can give it to you this afternoon with our
It depends, we
spreadsheet.
don't know what the guidelines are yet.
Right.
Right, we
Okay.
know there's gonna be a cap, we don't
Yeah,
know
correct.
exactly what that cap is, and if that cap is gonna be land area or units. So nobody has that number yet.
We can have it once we get the guidelines.
Yes.
Yeah, that'll be a helpful number to know.
It will.
Just trying to figure out, looking at the map, just trying to understand,
VC1 is the purple along Route 9.
right, is that the only place it is?
Yes.
Yes, it's the
Yes.
only place it is, and it was kind of put there to help with contiguity.
I understand,
Yep.
and I was just trying to understand if there was any other area affected or
Nope.
not.
Not any other area.
But I think maybe this is helpful, because I think you just said this, but
Yeah.
essentially what you're proposing is to eliminate VC1 from anywhere in the text as a proposed sub-district. On Monday's meeting, you would then need to determine, are those areas that were VC1 being removed entirely? Are they changing to a
Right.
MRT? Are they changing to VC2? But this is just a complete, just in the text, we would just,
Right, all we're doing
X.
today is text,
Yeah,
but
correct.
people are correct. We would have to examine the map and look at
Correct.
the other districts and see what belongs there in order to keep the contiguity. And-
Right.
And as Councilor
If-
Wright said, it's
if
most
they-
likely MRT. And they're probably, and as others have said, some of that area is not walkable, so it's not part of our village center idea. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
How many did you say units are VC1?
of the 10,000, it was 2,000.
Yeah, I have 1668, yeah.
My only concern about that as a policy is that some of that 10,000, I would like to, so to speak, spend on height reduction, you know, in the.
well, we're gonna get
VC3.
more units when we count the priority streets.
Well, but but I guess the point is, I don't wanna foreclose that. I'm open to the idea of substituting MRT. If we substituted MRT, what would we gain back? Do you have any idea of what the net would be?
I'll tell you in a minute. 2 minutes.
Probably a few hundred, but we can let Pam give her number and then, you know, we'll,
I mean, as a
Get the
struggle,
guidelines.
I'm sympathetic to the idea because I think Route 9 curb cuts is not a wise
I agree.
policy, right?
Yeah.
But as a question of where I want to, so to speak, spend the overage, if we have that option,
Yeah,
that's,
and-
I need to understand that.
If I can just make a comment, I'm interested in seeing if we can create more equity, and reduce Ward 6 from 69.3% of the MRT
it's not just what's,
land.
it's 6 and 5.
6 and, yeah, but Newton Highlands and Newton Center. Because right now, that's 63% of the units in the city and essentially 70% of the land area And if we think about that in another way, we're taking 70% in wards 5 in wards 5 and 6, and we're splitting the remaining 30% among all 7 other wards. And that, so I'd like to look and see how that affects our ability to reduce slightly the MRT unit count in those 2 areas.
So we'll be getting to that when we get to the map discussion. I just wanna clarify something. So to make sure people understand too what you're saying. So we're talking about what's in Ward 5 and 6, because that's the whole contiguous district. But it's only 2 of the 6 areas that are counting toward NBTA compliance. That's what the 60% and 70% are. It doesn't count the other 6 areas that are part of the Village Center overlay district. It's just the part of the compliance formula. So I understand your point, and I understand you're thinking about it with respect to the unit count that drops if we get rid of the VC1 district, but we're not getting rid of the land area. We're gonna use a lot of that land area to keep the continuity, but we're gonna have no purple and more green.
Yeah, so if you,
Down by me,
if you,
not by you.
if you made every VC1 lot MRT and just high level, assuming you could fit the 4 units on each, which is probably not the case for every lot, but you would have about 540 units.
Added back, okay.
So you're talking a net of
1,500.
And there's gonna be a considerable gain, when the guidelines, there'll be considerable gain when those other streets come back. The priority streets that are coming back with the change in guideline.
Right, because those are all mostly VC3, some VC3s.
It's almost all VC3, yeah.
You can't count the first floor, but you count what's above it.
But for the VC1, to count 4 units, you only need a 3,400 square foot lot. And for an MRT lot, unit, and on VC1, I went through every lot on Route 9, there's a set of row houses, but there might be 8 or 10 lots that couldn't accommodate 4 units, but pretty much all the rest will.
Yeah.
So are we ready to vote?
I think you should feel comfortable voting on this one, because I think it's almost gonna be something close to an even trade.
Well, I'm gonna support the motion as a straw vote, but because I want to see what happens. But because I think we need to see what that scenario analysis looks like. But I reserve judgment on.
I understand when we get to mapping, we're gonna figure out what goes there.
Well, and there may be some other things that, what do we else, or is there some VC2 that ought to be a VC1 somewhere? I just don't know.
Well, and there might be a lot along Route 9 that should be a VC2. I don't, because we're looking at really
I
tiny.
understand, and that's a map question, but
You're right.
at least for deferral.
So we need to, the concept I'm trying to put forward is that the zone by itself, it doesn't really work. And it's a simpler proposal overall. If we have 3 districts instead of 4.
This is consistent with the Councilor Leary principles.
Yeah.
Simplify, simplify, simplify.
Yeah. Councilor Krinsman, did you want to speak? Oh, I saw your hand.
Yeah, well, I mean, my first thought on this is that when we get to the map, supporting this motion takes one of our options away from us. And we're gonna only have basically a menu of 3 choices when we get to the map as opposed to 4. And so I don't like taking away that option now. If we get to the map and realize that every VC1 should be replaced by an MRT or a VC2, then it's a no-brainer to eliminate VC1. But if we eliminate it now, we've limited our choices when we get to the map and our abilities to sort of step down with some commercial added in. So I'm not gonna support the motion. I don't think it makes sense to limit our choices that way, but I'm open to the fact that when we get to the map, there may not be a place for VC1 and we could eliminate it at that point.
Okay, but we're still gonna take a vote on our sense of the text. Okay, all right.
I'm gonna go with them too.
Okay, so all those in favor of eliminating VC1 from the text, at this point, understanding that we're gonna need the planning department to work on an alternative along that stretch, please say aye. Aye. Is that just 4? Okay. Or were you?
I'm gonna hold Yeah, I'm gonna abstain, yeah.
Okay, all right, so we have one abstention. Well, okay. All those against?
I'll abstain.
I am against.
I am against. Okay, we have 2 I am againsts and 2 abstentions. Got it.
So
Okay.
As a straw vote.
As a straw vote, I totally understand how you're thinking of this as in wanting to see what's gonna happen with the map. But thank you for that.
I didn't want it to fail as a straw vote.
No, and everybody is perfectly within their right to
Yeah,
abstain.
yeah.
This is committee work, where abstentions are fine.
If it comes back, however, we should pay more attention to
Yeah.
what it says, rather than just, you shouldn't assume that if it comes back, it's right as it is.
I'm sorry.
BC one.
If it comes back?
If we don't eliminate it, we
Oh.
probably need to do more work.
I think it needs more work.
Oh, it does, it does. I would totally agree with that, but I think we do need to look at the map.
Yeah.
And, so Councilor Wright, would you like to hold on your amendment for now, withdraw it for now?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have 4, 2, 2. Okay. Councilor Wright proposed that in the design standards for a half-story, for the requirements for a half-story, I'm gonna say in the VC2 and VC3 districts, because we don't allow it in MRT, that we increase the half-story step back from 7 feet to 10 feet.
And that base requirement is in the dimensional standards for buildings, and there's additional pieces in the design standards.
Oh, okay, so it's in the dimensional standards, but I think of the roof shape and all that as part of
There's
it's a
additional,
design
but
standard
just
also.
the half-story step back,
Right.
as proposed is 7 feet, and the amendment is to make it 10 feet.
Yep. Okay, Councilor Wright, you wanna speak to it?
Yeah, it's getting these the taller heights away from the street, and away from across the street and seeing it and just getting it back, especially in the front of the building. I'm not as concerned on the side or the back, but especially in the front.
Okay, Councilor Leary?
Yeah, I'd like a little more clarification from the planning department about what's the impact of that 3 feet difference? I mean,
I wouldn't say it's significant. I think, as Councilor Wright says, if it's as the mass moves further back, it does reduce the impact on the street. I think you might speak to some developers, and there might be some issues where certain lots start to get narrow, and then you want to make that half floor as efficient as possible. There might create some inefficiencies because of the depth of the space behind it, but I don't think it would be too significant.
But right now we have, if the lot's less than 70 feet wide or less than 70 feet deep, you don't have that setback.
On the rear,
I think it's on any of them.
I think
it's on any.
if it's that, I think the intent is that it would be along the rear, but on the front, you would still
Okay.
have to meet the setback.
That's not how I read it.
Okay, we can double check that. I think
Yeah.
that's the
Let's
intent.
make sure that's clear. Yeah. So it's from the front or even a side elevation, if it's facing the street, has to be a step back.
So I think, I think what we would, yes.
Yes, I think that is how it's written, right?
So if the building is on a corner, it's got two
It has two
side
fronts.
setbacks.
It is two fronts,
Just
yeah.
two fronts.
Yeah.
But right now, though, the building has a setback all the way around.
I think what we would recommend is that, I think we'd recommend that the setback of the upper story be for the front and the rear only, except when abutting a residential district.
Or a side street.
Or
well, that would be a front.
that would be a
Oh,
front,
because that's a front.
And
also.
then,
Okay.
I think it's written right now that, and if you go to page 7 of the draft code, at the top it says half-story step back in feet for a flat roof, 7 feet along all lot lines. That is correct. I think what we would recommend, in addition to the amendment to saying to create it 10 feet, is to say that the step backs are required along the front and required along the rear. If you are a VC3 abutting another VC3, we allow you can have buildings touching each other. And so in that case, it wouldn't make sense to have the step back requirement along that side lot line where the two buildings can be touching.
It's a party
But
hall.
but if you are abutting a residential district, then of course you would have to, regardless of whether it's a front, back, or side, it would have to be step back. So I think that's what we would recommend. And then for the 70 feet, when a lot is less than 70 feet deep, then along the rear, you wouldn't have to provide that step back. And we're getting really complicated here, and I apologize for that.
If it abuts a residential?
No, if it abuts a residential, you
That's
don't, that you
beautiful.
have to do. If you're ever abutting a residential, you have to do the more,
I think that's been.
the higher restrictions.
So with
So-
that description.
Can I just say, so on a half-story setback to flat roof, buildings on any lot with a lot width of 70 feet or less are exempt from the upper story setback requirements along the side lot lines. Okay, just the side lot lines, okay.
So I'm gonna I'm gonna count on the planning department to clarify the text. But with
Yes,
that description, I'm gonna say that I'm fine with, I think it's a de minimis change, and it will actually have some effect on the perception of the upper story. For me, so,
we would support it?
yeah, I would
You would
support
support changing it
from 7 to 10 feet. I think it's a minor
A minor
amendment.
thing? Okay, I just wasn't sure. I didn't really actually know, I wasn't sure how I was gonna vote on that one.
It's not a meaningless change, it's just a minimus.
So,
Yeah, Counselor Albright.
I'm gonna abstain because I would love for you to talk to some developers and find out what they say, because I've heard from developers that as it is, the half-story causes them difficulties, and to make it a further setback, I'd like to hear what they have to say.
and I can say that, I think we have, and I think some developers will say that it eats into their bottom line. I think that the things that we're doing here are what's best for the city.
Yeah.
I think developers will make projects work. I think they have that, they're very good at that. I know we were talking about AMIs earlier, I think this I would say is de minimis, that is not. So I think we have spoken to them. I think developers are very good at making things work.
So even if it's 10 feet on both the front and the back?
I think that 70-foot exemption is important there,
Correct.
because for narrow lots, you end up getting this sort of useless
Right.
space. And one of the things we do hear from, when we've talked to developers about this, is, you're stacking your plumbing,
Right.
right? And you're not gonna shift the units, and you have your elevator core, and your stairwell core. That's not gonna move. So your units end up being less deep on the upper level. And then maybe they end up being a little longer and less deep. I think there is a certain point where it's just hard to fit all the pieces and make it work through the whole building. I don't know that 10 feet is that breaking point. I do think if you have some exemption for narrow sites, or, that helps.
To that, a double loaded residential core, is 60 feet is probably where you wanna be. So the 70 feet, the exemption beginning at the 70 feet means the back does not need to be set back 10 feet to the front. You've got a 60-foot wide half story essentially, and we're close to it,
Yeah.
and I think you can make that work.
Okay, ready to vote? All those in favor of the amendment to increase the half-story setback to 10 feet from 7 feet, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Unanimous. There you go. Okay, the next is, reducing the half-story pitched roof height to 14 feet from 18 feet. This has been proposed by a few in the community as well, and, or maybe it's a reflection of that, I don't know, but, planning department, do you wanna speak to this? I have some thoughts on it, if that's helpful.
Well, I think there's two things here, and maybe you can expand on this in your thoughts, is that there's this is for a pitched roof, so the 18 feet is at the top of the pitch. That's what we're talking about, or going from 18 feet to 14 feet. I think in the MRT zone, which is in these residential areas, I think we can look all around the city where there are Victorians and older homes that have that 18-foot pitched roof. And I think the impact of that, the slope, no one I don't think is saying, that's too tall. No one I think is out there saying that's too tall. So I think the 18 feet is as a allowance. It doesn't mean that everyone will do it. It means that the zoning allows for that envelope. And I think if we're looking for variety, if we're looking for differences in design, as well as looking at our historical context, I think the 18 feet is appropriate.
We set the 18 feet to make sure that you're getting real usable space in that upper floor.
I know.
So that was really the key there.
But there's a difference between MRT and the business zones. Are you gonna go there?
I would say that I think in the VC2 and the VC3 districts, there was a push in general, Councilor Wright and others, to want to see a variety of roof forms. And I think likewise, you want to make sure that you can create usable space underneath of it. What I would think would happen in the VC2 and the VC3 districts where you have larger footprint or larger floor plate buildings is you would, if they were to go for a pitched roof, it would go for a pitched roof to a certain height, and they would probably then make it flat because
Mansard roof.
It's
not technically a mansard,
that's the idea, yeah.
but essentially you wouldn't, and you can't go, if they do that, it's 18 feet to the pitch. You can't go 18 feet and then, I mean, I guess
you could. So I'm gonna just add to that a little bit, if that's, I think, I understand this as looking at this differently for MRT and the business zones. And there are a number of design standards that I hope we're making clear, which are appropriate for the MRT zones versus the business zones. Like an open front porch, you're not gonna have in VC2 and VC3, right? So the pitched roof to a peak is gonna happen in the MRT zone because it's a small floor area and it's a house form, right? It's gonna work. But if you have a large lot in a 10,000 or 15,000 square foot footprint, you are gonna go up to a flat and you don't need anything higher than 14 feet. So I personally, I understand this, and I think, I don't think anybody would build more than they need, because you can't have another story. You may not have another story. So I would approve this because you basically, there's a design thing in here that you're trying to incentivize and I was talking with Zach about it the other day, you have a base to the building, you have the middle and you have the top, and you're trying to put a hat on the building to make it attractive. And I think 14 feet is plenty to achieve that. I agree with Councilor Wright. So.
Recognize those
Hi.
footsteps
Yeah.
anywhere.
Yeah.
All I can say is I've been listening a little bit, God bless all.
Okay, so I just wanted to add my 2 cents on that.
But MRT, 18 feet.
Yeah. So MRT is 18 feet, but we've capped the height in MRT to a total of 40 feet, so that's cool. So I think, can we have a friendly amendment here to make this for the VC2 and VC3 districts?
Sure.
Okay.
VC1 too.
If we don't eliminate VC1, VC1 also.
The ghost of VC1.
Right. Anybody else? Can we vote? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Great. Okay.
I just want to say, I've been reading the Brookline. They have 104 pages. They're voting on it tonight. And I really like a lot of their design descriptions or requirements and things like that. And they go into good detail. And it's all about keeping within the neighborhood, the new buildings and things like that. And they have a maximum of 4 stories. Maximum.
That's great. let's, we
let's
gotta
move on.
keep focused,
Yeah.
yeah, I have their code, I'm reading it, it's pretty, but, you know, here we go. It's got nice illustrations, reduce active use depth to a minimum, okay. Okay, so, the next amendment, also proposed by Councilor Wright, is where we have commercial on the ground floor, where we're requiring active uses on the ground floor. In the code, there is a minimum depth of 25 feet specified. Councilor Wright is proposing to reduce that to 12 feet.
Yeah.
Can I have the planning department first thing, Councilor Wright?
So we would recommend to eliminate this entirely. I think if you want the opportunity to create funky, interesting, smaller spaces, we've spoken to a few people about this. If you require a depth of 25 feet or 12 feet, it sets a kind of square foot size, and I think we could find all over in all different places across the area, a small coffee shop or a small, craft store or whatever, that is interesting and locally owned and small business. And I think we just don't need to set this requirement that there's a minimum depth to the retail space.
I do.
Okay.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, depth meaning how wide they have to be?
How deep into the building, so.
How deep?
So from the sidewalk, how far back?
Correct.
I'm thinking West Newton Square, like the shops in there, like, that you look in how deep they are, and I
Well,
don't
you
think.
might have one in front of another one that goes behind it, a little pop-up or whatever, and
And historically, you needed deeper spaces for inventory, and that is just not needed anymore.
So, am I hearing that you're taking a friendly amendment to just eliminate the requirement entirely?
yes.
So where we're requiring ground floor retail, the proposal from the planning department is to eliminate the requirement, a depth requirement at all, and you're good with that, so we're gonna withdraw this amendment. Okay, great.
But do we have to vote on their amendment?
Okay, let's do that. All those in favor of the planning department's recommendation, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we got it. All right.
Do you entertain a brief break for everyone's ability to move around for a minute?
Okay, we got 3 minutes until the hour, so
Okay.
a 3-minute break,
minutes is
everybody.
great.
Okay.
I will gladly take 3 minutes.
I'm impressed that people are trying to impose other towns.
Susan does, and I have been. It's not that we have the time, we're just, we're fanatic at this point. Did I miss calling? The first one kind of stands alone. Reduce the maximum height, this is from Councilor Laredo, asking to reduce the maximum height, I guess in the respective districts,
Yeah.
I'm not sure, to 2, 3, and 4 stories for the corresponding zones, but I think we're gonna call on Councilor Laredo to, you're targeting 3 zones, is it BC 1, 2, and 3, not the MRT zone?
You know, I'm gonna defer to Councilors Wright and Baker on this. I think they've set forth the belief that we don't need all the height that's called for to achieve our goals here. And if we do need extra height, we can certainly do it by special permit. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, that's a different kind of amendment then. So I just want to point out to everybody, as we know, we allow 2.5 stories in all of our residential districts today.
Yeah.
So what, I need to know what districts we're talking about, Mr. Lamau?
Yeah, for Councilor Laredo,
These aren't, the difference is, these aren't really 2.5-story buildings, Madam Chair. They're 3-story buildings, and we ought to be clear about that.
This was my attempt, Councilor Laredo, in your submission of amendments, I think you said do away with the half story, so this was kind of my simplification of that, and if I misinterpreted it, then I'm sorry, but that was just what I was trying to do, because I think your comment in it was, don't allow the half story.
Well, I want to understand, what are you, when you're putting this in here, are you saying 2 stories or are you saying 3 stories?
So this is why the district you're talking about is important. Are you talking about, if you're talking about the MRT district, that's in our neighborhoods, and we've already capped the height at 40 feet. So in our neighborhoods, currently we allow 2.5 stories and 36 feet. It's not a big jump. Before we amended it to the 40 feet, it was a big jump. So now we're in scale with the existing neighborhoods. And plus there's all the rules around the adaptive reuse and so forth. So if you're not talking about the MRT district, but you're talking about VC1, VC2, and VC3, it makes somewhat more sense in terms of what you're asking for. So if you would like to defer to Councilors Wright and Baker, their names were not on this, but I know they have similar thoughts.
I'm very happy to defer to Councilors Wright and Baker. They're my colleagues from Ward 7 and 3 are quite able in
Okay, so,
analysis. Thank you.
thank you. Councilor Baker or Wright, who would like to go first on this? And what it is, and what you would like it to be.
Well, let me speak conceptually, and then maybe Councilor Wright will be more specific than I. But I guess one of the basic policy judgments that the VC districts, at least 3 and 2, leaving 1 aside for a minute, implies that a certain number of stories is going to be an important dimension of the package. The question is, do we, when I've heard comments from citizens, one of the things that has been of some concern to them is the fact that these are significantly taller buildings. Now, Councilor Danberg made the point in Newton Center, there's 5-story, there are places, and the towers in Chestnut Hill is much taller and all of that. But we're talking about the general pattern of what would be allowed as of right, as opposed to by special permit. So the question, I think, implicit in Councilor Laredo's proposal is, do we need to go that high in order to make this work? We can get the number of units because now, again, we've lost some provisionally in doing away with VC1, but there is at least the appearance of count. This is why Councilor Wright can be more specific than I can about whether in fact we need those numbers of stories, and if we don't, is it an appropriate amendment to try and make this more saleable and also build the kind of city we want to keep the scale somewhat lower along the lines that Brookline, I guess, is making a judgment about. So that's the policy choice. The specifics I'll defer to my colleague.
Okay, let me just point out, but just before you start, maybe you're gonna do this, and I'll apologize, but we not only cap the height in MRT, but we also just reduce the height in VC2 and VC3 to the 14 feet from 18 feet. So And we all agreed to set back the half-story further, which reduces the size of it, both of those two.
Yeah.
Okay,
So some of this has to do with the map issue, where to put in VC2, VC3. But one thing with our residents, they're very confused with the half story. And it's really a full story setback. And I think saying, 4 stories or saying 3 stories or saying 5 stories, whatever it might be, I think it'd be better, easier for people to understand that than doing the half story. I know Brookline, even though they do a setback, they don't call it a half story, they just call it a full story.
So is the amendment to call it 5 stories in VC3 and 4 stories in VC2, or is the amendment to reduce the heights? I'm not clear.
So from my perspective, reducing the height is more of a map perspective, okay? But I think also, and I'm not sure if this is what Councilor Laredo was going at too, is so for, it's 3.5 in VC2, but instead just call it 4 stories. And then in VC3, call it 5 stories.
But if it's a pitched roof, then it's a half story.
A pitched roof is even higher, taller than a full flat roof when you get to it. But
the floor area is significantly reduced though, you have to.
I think we've spoken about this a numerous amount of times. I think, the committee voted last year that, to set the maximums at 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5. We can do a better job of calling it what it is, but objectively, a half-story step back 10 feet with a flat roof, or a pitched roof that starts to pitch, at the bottom of the facade, has a different impact, which is why we're calling it a half story, than if at the 4th story, right at the lot line, you go vertically up again 12 feet. And this is perfectly illustrated standing at the corner of Walnut Street and Washington Street and looking at Trio. That corner building is 5 floors fully vertical, straight up. As you walk further down Washington Street towards West Newton, those buildings are 5 stories, the same height. However, the floors are set back. There is an objective difference, and I think that's why we're saying a half story. And I think that's where, and again, Councilor Laredo can disagree, you can disagree, anyone can disagree. I just think given that, I think we are justified in calling it a half story.
I don't think this is a substantive
Yeah.
amendment.
Yeah.
Anyway, right, because this sounds like it's not substantive.
What do you mean?
That it's just to change the language, not to change the actual height, is my understanding from what Councilor Wright said.
Yeah, but I would defer to Councilor Laredo. I have a different thing on the setbacks, but.
May I be heard on that, Madam Chair, then, or
Let's
I'll wait,
try,
whatever you
we're
prefer?
gonna try and stick with this amendment, but I think Councilor Laredo, we're grappling with this, we're trying to figure out what it is. What the amendment is, actually.
Would you prefer I wait?
No,
what it is.
I mean, what is
What are you
the
trying to
amendment?
do?
What, 4 stories or
It's, Ms. Kyra, to your point, it's more than language, okay? Using 4.5 implies that it's really 4 plus a little more. More accurately, it's 5 stories with the 5th story having different requirements. But, I'm gonna be very candid here. I think the will of the planning department and some of my colleagues is to try to minimize the impact in the eyes of the public as much as possible. And therefore, using language which says 4 and a little bit more makes it more palatable. Personally, I disagree. I think that we ought to be honest about what we're doing. It is a 5-story building with the 5th floor subject to some different requirements. Again, it's the will of the committee and the council. If it chooses to call it something different, so be it, but I'm a believer in accuracy, and I believe that's far more accurate.
Okay, I would like to add to this, and then I'm gonna call on Councilor Danber, because I think how this kind of a definition is used is really important, and it's really typical in zoning codes. Take the residential districts to call a home a 1-story, a 2-story, or a 2.5-story, or a, whatever it is. But the half-story, it could be a 1.5-story. A cape is often a 1.5-story. Most homes in the city of Newton are 2.5 stories. And the half-story is not half of the floor area below. In fact, we actually have a definition in our code that says that the half-story may have habitable space up to 2/3 of the area of the floor below. It's called a half-story, but then the half-story has a definition. And that's really typical in zoning codes throughout the Commonwealth.
And the assessor's database uses that story.
The assessor's database uses it also. So it's a matter of making the definition clear, and I think that's what the particular dimensional requirements are trying to do. And the half-story is also trying to incentivize some interest at the top floor. But I would like to call on other members of the committee on this topic. Okay, Councilor Danberg was next.
Thank you. I'm not gonna support this. I understand, I think I understand what your goal is, although I'm not entirely sure. But if we remove the half-story from 1, 2, and 3, or 2, 3, and 4, what we're gonna wind up with, in all likelihood, is a lot of flat roofs. Because one of the big advantages to a half-story is that you create interest in the roof lines. And having a pitched roof is one of the ways where you create a half-story. Where most of the half-stories are created is under a pitched roof. I, for one, would prefer to see, going down a street, pitched roofs on houses than a lot of flat roofs. And if we remove the half-story, and I've never had confusion, I've never heard anyone being confused by what a half-story is. Because it's been around for so long, and it creates interest in our community and in the architectural look
Okay.
of the buildings.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Wright and then Baker.
I'll try to be quick. So it's more, I think, is the terminology. You still would be allowed to do, instead of calling it 3.5 stories, it'd be 4 stories with the different dimensions on the fourth story. Now, I agree, houses are smaller, just like we talked before, and they have the pitch roofs and it's 2.5. But with the bigger footprint, you're not having this huge pitch roof, so you're gonna have a flat space. So it's a lot more space than just a smaller footprint house. So I see it as more of the terminology. You're not getting rid of that top story, but that top story has different dimensionals requirements.
Okay, all true. I have Director Heath, Councilor Baker, can you go first?
So I guess there are two different questions that I think are cooking here. One is, what do we call what is there? Do you call it a half-story as they do in the residential, or do you say there's something different here, which is a full story minus as opposed to a full story plus? This is kind of the terminology. And I guess my question is, do we need the extra story generally in these contexts? In other words, if we said whether we have the 4-story plus or the 5-story minus, do we need one of those stories? All of those stories, or can we get by with less? That's the question because we have in the model now more capacity than the MBTA Act requires, plus then we also have the VC districts on top of that. So the question, we've started with the premise that you need a certain number of amount of space in order to generate the units that you want, and we've gone up to do some of that. So the premise, I think, of the question that I'm curious about is, do we still need all of that, or could we take a floor out without doing?
Okay, I think we have two very different
I
questions
agree,
going on
and that's why
here.
I'm trying to separate the two
And
ideas.
in fact, there's no proposed amendment that says, should we eliminate stories from the different districts? So
I thought that part was implicit in part of this, that's why I brought it up.
It doesn't sound like it.
It doesn't
Right,
sound
I
like it,
understand.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, so hold on, so
Right.
if we can though, we can take two separate votes, but I think that one question that I'm hearing here is that there's confusion among some people or dislike of the terminology for half-story. That it does not, you know, even though in our residential district, we call it a half-story and then we define it in the text, and we call it a half-story here, and then it's defined by dimensional requirements, that somehow should be eliminated from the text. That's not a useful definition. And the other thing is, should we allow another half-story in each one of these districts? Should we have it at all?
Or a story additional, that's.
Or
yeah.
keep the half-story and
Yeah,
take out
one,
a story?
take one.
That's a totally separate question though,
I
right?
understand, and that's part of why I'd like to at least have a conversation about that, because I think that's important for
Okay.
the public.
But I think we should, I know there's a couple
You
people.
separate it, but I think it's important to separate the two. One is
Yes,
nomenclature,
let's
the other
separate,
is substance.
let's separate the two. Let's take up what we think is before us at the moment, the best we can. And Director Heath, did you want to speak before I call on Councilor Ryan?
Councilman Ryan can go first.
Go ahead, Councilor Ryan.
So, just so I understand that, in the residential, the third story, or the half story, is 2/3 of the second floor living space? And in the commercial on the half story, is it 2/3 or is it?
Generally about 2/3. It depends on
Even
the.
on the commercial building, like a village center, 4.5 story.
Approximately, but it could be less and it could be more depending on the size of the
And
footprint.
it just got smaller 5 minutes ago.
Right, but let me finish.
Yeah.
The half, if we got rid of the half story, I hear the same from constituents also, they question this half story. I used to question the half story, but, if we got rid of that, does that mean we're gonna have all boxes and flat roofs in village centers? Or-
Yeah, probably. If we reduce it to, well, I don't know about 2, but 3 or 4 stories.
They'll build to the height, to the
Yeah, so like
maximum
a
height.
4.5 story becomes a 4th story, so we flatten the roof.
We'll have all flat roofs.
There's two different things. We either get rid of the definition, which I'm not sure if that makes sense, or are we getting rid of the half-story, period? Are we getting rid of it as a physical thing? So,
My version would not get rid of the half story, get rid of the understory.
I hear you.
You understand?
Okay,
Okay.
so there's two different
That's
questions.
my story, and I've taken to it. Never-
Director Heath,
We have been with this concept since at least last summer, if not before. We've shown it to the public this way. We've been consistently calling it this. I get the argument. Is it a 5th story or is it a 4th story with a little bit more? At this stage of the game, I would be hesitant to change the nomenclature here and say, we're now gonna call it 5 stories minus. We're gonna confuse the heck out of people. People there may be certain people that are frustrated that there's a 5th story, but it's not a full 5th story, but why aren't we calling it 5th? We've called it 4.5 from the beginning. Tonight, we've even sliced it in a little bit further from 7 feet to now 10 feet, so it's even less.
Height down.
reduce the height.
It's even less than it was before. No matter where you fall, I'd rather get to the substantive issue as to whether or not there should be more or less height and not get into, let's call it 5 stories versus 4.5.
So we have two different questions here, and I wanted to draw attention to a comment that Councilor Wright made, which, how we draw the maps is probably, at least in good part, where we need to go in terms of whether or not we eliminate a story, but we can take that up as a separate textual amendment if that's being proposed. So, how do I phrase this? Councilor Ray, do you have your hand up to speak again, or is that just left over?
It is a mistake, Madam Chair.
No problem, you're allowed to make mistakes.
With White Baker speaking on my behalf.
Oh, okay. So, I think we're done talking about this, if I can frame the question properly, which is really challenging. So, There's a proposal to eliminate, I'll say, the concept of a change the nomenclature of what a half story really means to make it more specific from how we've been considering it all along.
I mean, it's sort of an extra story, but it's not it's not a half, it's sort of.
Okay, so but
I mean-
are we wanting to get involved
In changing the nomenclature.
in changing the
No.
nomenclature?
Say no.
Okay.
All those in favor of changing the nomenclature at this time, please, regarding the half story, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No.
I'm gonna abstain because I wanna talk about the other.
Well, okay, so we have 6, 1, 1. Got that?
It was
161.
There was one in
6 in
favor,
favor.
6 opposed.
6 opposed, I'm sorry, thank you very much. 1 in favor, 6 opposed, I was thinking of the
You're
other
right.
question. Thank you so much. Yeah, okay. So, and now we have a question before us, which is, do we want to, in each of the VC zones, I'm gonna say, not the MRT zone, want to eliminate a full story from the total potential height?
So do you wanna keep the half story and?
Yeah, we keep the half story, but I guess the policy choice here, and I think this is implicit in why the nomenclature issue was, I think, cooking up, is because people said this is a bigger, taller structure that, when we're done, than this community needs on the as of right. Now, what do we do with the special permits and others? But I think we really haven't responded well yet to the question of, do we need all of that height in order to make these things? Now, we can do the map analysis and say, okay, if we keep it, we will have it here and not there, right? That's the conversation for next time. But I do think it's worth at least having a conversation among ourselves, and then the public can sort of listen in and say, if we're looking at the village, the VC3 or VC2, well, the VC3 is really where it matters, right? But I guess you do the same thing, you step it down. You take a story out in both cases. So the question is that an outcome that still gets us to a significant increase in our opportunity for housing, but lowers the scale of the result? Because I hear people talking about scale. Now, maybe their perceptions are erroneous, but this is part of why the community conversation is out there. People saying we're going to end up with much taller village centers than we are used to, and without any oversight from the city council, and you can write you've heard this. So the question, I think, is, do we need that extra? And I would be interested in the planning department's perspective now. That's sure.
Okay, please go ahead.
Well, I would object, I would say a couple of things. I object to the idea that there's no council oversight. The city council is the only body that can set what is allowed. So you are effectively, your oversight is right now. Yeah, no, I know, but I think it is important, because I think it's confusing to the public when you say that the city council cannot inform, but the city council is the only body that can make it by right in the first place. So we're basically saying we're establishing a framework that we allow this type of development to happen, and the person allowing is the city council. So I think that's just the first thing. I think the other piece is that this committee, and I think the council, and as public as Director Heath said, is that this idea of 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5 stories spread out throughout our village centers and stepping down as you move away has been discussed, has been voted on here conceptually. And so I think if the amendment you want to put forward is that the maximum height in VC3 gets reduced from 4.5 to 3.5, and in VC2, 3.5 to 2.5, I think you should put forward that amendment, and I think we should see what happens.
Yeah, if I can also just add on to that, we did an economic analysis to set these heights and to make sure that there is something that's viable. You're right that it's more than is allowed by right today, but we're not seeing anything get built under what's allowed by right today because it's not viable. It is, however, more restrictive than what we're seeing done in MU4 today. And so if we cut everything back by 1 story, I think we're just undermining a lot of the goals here because we're not going to see much get done, especially where we require ground floor commercial. I think you're really not going to see these as viable developments. And we're just going to continue to see requests for MU4 because that allows 5 full stories, larger buildings, larger footprints, and far fewer design standards.
Thank you for that.
So I think this is helpful. I don't think the sentiment of the committee to take the floor out is here, and I just want to be clear about that. But I think the conversation is important because it leads us to, I think, the second question, which is, if we do maintain, regardless of whether they call it half-story or less, I mean, there's still an open issue that we can talk about. The question is, where is the appropriate location? So I'm not going to offer that amendment because I don't think it'll go anywhere, but I do think it's important that we have had a conversation around where this goes. I'm hearing from the department a sense that the additional story, whether you, in each of these, is necessary to incentivize the kind of developments you want. Am I hearing that correctly?
That's correct.
Okay. So, I mean, we can all argue about that premise and the conclusion, but at least I wanted to hear from the department that's their view.
Thank you.
So
And
thank you.
so we will have this discussion more when we get to the maps.
Yeah, I understand, but I just think that there's the whole frame question and then there's the
Yeah.
specific choices.
I appreciate that. It's
Okay.
an important point to be making out there. That, you know, that we're putting the rules here instead of having them be discretionary through a land use process. I think is also an important point to
Yeah,
be.
and that's all,
Yeah.
and we've only got to think about whether this is the right package, but
Right.
for the moment, I just appreciate taking a moment to talk about it, because it's been out there, but not really explicit, I think.
Thank you. Okay. The next is,
Are we taking a vote on that? Is that
no,
not a
I think
voting?
the
I'm not offering
amendment
an
is
amendment at
withdrawn.
this point.
He's not offering an
Okay.
amendment, so it's not actually withdrawn, it's just not being offered.
Okay.
Right? So we're gonna handle it through the maps. The next is, well, there's 2 that have to do with residential districts. One is from Councilor Baker and one is from Peter Doringer. I'm gonna put them both out. Okay? Isn't it tight? So the first by Councilor Baker is to reduce the maximum height allowed within 50 feet of abutting residential districts from 3.5 stories to that which is equal to the maximum height of that abutting zone, except as modified by special permit. And Mr. Doringer from the planning board asked generally that require that additional protections for abutting a residential district apply when a residential district is across the street or right of way, so they're similar but different. Okay, so I guess if a right of way might be more than 50 feet, for example, right? But most are. Okay, so maybe they're different. We'll take up Councilor Baker's first. Would you like to speak to it?
So, again, I'm not sure this is precisely framed the way we would ultimately draft it, but the idea is, this is a case of trying to say, and we're getting at it with a little bit of the amendments that were made already tonight when we talked about the setbacks. So that may have been responsive, but my concern is, again, to try and make the boundary properties situations where they fit as much as possible with the adjacent residential properties. Now, whether this particular amendment will add, is too complicated, I'm open to persuasion. But I do think that the department has, in various places, set the 50-foot threshold where certain things are more restrictive. And it seemed to me that there was some value in thinking about the height impacts adjacent to residences. And I've heard comments from people in residences next to larger buildings that that's one of the things they really are bothered by. Is the height adjacent to them. So the question is, in those rare cases where they do abut, is it appropriate to have a more restrictive height? Now, whether this is the right formula, I'm open to discussion, but I think the policy is what I'd like to have the committee wrestle with.
Okay, can I have the planning department respond? And then go around, please?
Yeah, so right now, we're proposing stepping down to 3.5 stories. So there is a step down now within 50 feet. The max height would be 3.5 stories. When you're abutting a residential district, the max height in those residential districts is 2.5 to 3 stories. So we thought this was providing that transition of going from, 4.5 potentially to 3.5 to 3 or 2.5. I will say if the committee wants to further reduce that, if you want to reduce that below 3.5, I would recommend rephrasing this a little bit. It gets confusing when your regulations are dependent upon another zone's regulations. And the heights vary in the residential zones depending on whether it's a flat roof or a pitched roof. You have different heights.
Right.
So, and by right versus special permit. So I think if you want to further reduce it from 3.5, it should just be a flat number rather than dependent upon another district. So reduce it from 3.5 to 3 versus 3.5 to whatever the adjacent max height is, because that's not always clear.
Clarifying, point of
I
information, go
don't
ahead.
understand something. Lyle, are you suggesting or requesting that the height within 50 feet of the height of a building within 50 feet of a residential district be the same height as the maximum height that we now allow in a residential district, which is 2.5? So it's gotta be, if it's 2.5 in a residential district, you're requesting that it be 2.5? Because I think now it's 3.5, is that not the case?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm not particularly friendly to that, because I don't think we need to do this, I think we need to do this. I think the
But
2.5 to
show the
3.5.
And moved at an angle.
Yeah. Yeah, I think 2.5 to 3.5 to something different, 4.5 is more appropriate than 2.5 to 4.5.
Okay, I'm gonna call in Councilor Wright, and then while Councilor Baker's thinking about that.
So my amendment is kind of in the same vein. So right now, we're saying 15 feet from the residential, you can have 3.5 stories, which is 62 feet. Could be, 15 feet away. Right now, our present zoning says half the building height or 15 feet, whichever is larger. So VC2 and VC developments within 50 feet of lot line abutting a residential district, which is 3.5 stories with the present zoning setback, using that, half the building height or 15 feet, whichever is larger, the distance between it. So if your building is 40 feet tall, then you need to be 20 feet off the setback. Or you could do a step back. So if you're 15 feet, you can only be 30 feet away. And then as you get closer in, and that's our zoning right now.
So you're talking about setbacks?
Well, which is abutting the residential.
Okay, I just wanna make sure
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
following.
yeah.
You're talking about setbacks instead of height.
Well, it has to do with height.
They're connected.
They're connected.
Related, yes.
So right now, what is in our zoning is the half building height of 15 feet.
For the setback.
For the setback, but so if you're, yes.
So it could be the full building height.
But then you have to be farther away.
Right.
But you can be 15 feet away, which is our setback here, but you could only be 30 feet tall. And according to what we allow at 3.5 feet, it's 62 feet.
3.5 stories.
I mean, 3.5 stories, sorry.
If it's all commercial and maxes out the floor to floor height.
And now 58.
Yes.
50,
Which is-
58, because you
Which
chopped
is
4
twice
feet.
as high than
And-
what we allow now at 15 feet away.
And with a peaked roof.
No,
that we
that's a
cut
flat
back.
one. That's a flat one.
62 is a pitched roof.
Oh, is it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, and it's,
Okay.
which is now 58.
Okay,
because
so
you
it could
chopped
be 56 feet versus 30 feet. So right now, we allow 30 feet high building, and we get complaints about that, 15 feet away from residential.
But the upper floor will be 20, would be 15 plus 10, because it'll be 15 then 10-foot setback.
And then
So it'll be
now,
25 feet
we
back.
instead of 30 feet, we'd be allowing almost twice as high, 56, with some of it being set back. So I think this is too high, and having something else, either a lower height when you're closer to there, you know, you maybe do 2.5 stories and 3.5 stories. Okay.
I'm open to alternatives, Councilor Danberg's sliding hand. But I do think that what Councilor Wright has articulated is that it's a real steep differential, and that's potentially available between a VC3 property and a residential zone. And I think that we need more than we've got to offer that level of protection to those properties. And I'm not sure I've got the formula, but I just think if the committee says we're sympathetic to that objective, go back and think about it, give us some ideas, I'm perfectly satisfied with that at this level.
And it's for VC2 also. It's for VC2 and VC3, this would pertain to.
Okay, I'm gonna call on Councilor Ryan, has her hand up.
Yeah, I mean, just listening to this and thinking about what's going on, if you're doing a true step down, you know, to step down towards the residential, then what Kyra said is right, is it would be a true 3-story building. And the only other thing is you could do is, another 2.5-story building that would abut a commercial building. There's 2.5 that butts to the residential, but then on the other side, it's gonna have to go back to the 4.5. I like the idea better of the, an actual step down, 4.5,
Gradual step.
3, a true 3, not with a 1/2 story. And then you go to your 2.5 in the residential. That's my opinion.
So in other words, keep it where it is.
Or no, reduce.
No, that would be reducing it from 3.5 to 3.
Oh, 3.5 to 3, because you would have this step back of the 1/2 story.
No, I think
No.
what you're saying is just to make it a max of 3 stories within 50 feet,
It's a
right?
true step down into
If I'm
the
understanding correctly.
Okay,
a
3
true
stories within
3,
50
not a
feet.
3.5. a
okay,
true.
so that's, all right, so there's a concept here of, it sounds like, if Councilor Baker's amenable to this, which sounded like he might be.
Well, if you still have the inset we talked about earlier, would you still be able to do that?
Well, you wouldn't have that, right, because it wouldn't be a 1/2 story, it would just go down, if I'm
At 50
following.
feet, yeah, at 50 feet.
At 50 feet,
you
it would
could
be
go up.
3 stories.
Yeah.
And then you would go up to
4.5.
4.5 in VC3. In VC2, you would go from 3 to 3.5.
I think that's in general better than we have, so that's my, you know, if there's a general sense of the committee that that's an improvement that you're sympathetic to, then we can ask the department for that.
Okay.
The one concern I have is you just end up with flat roofs adjacent to residential.
Yeah,
And
probably, yeah, you don't.
And I like the idea of having some setback, so I would like to maintain something that softens the, you know.
I don't see the point of making a flat roof, as opposed to, the look of a pitched roof, perhaps story.
Well, in reality, you're probably going to see in that step down portion half a flat roof, right? Like you're not going to have a pitched for that portion that's shorter than the rest of the building,
Right.
most likely.
Yeah.
You could, but I wouldn't count on seeing that.
Councilor Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't said much thing, so I'm just gonna say, if you listen to the way I'm speaking about all of this earlier, I'm totally against flat roofs and boxes. But in this case, this is where you give and take. It's a true step down into the residential. If you end up with a flat roof on a true 3-story building, then so be it.
Does this work, because I'm just gonna ask the planning department, is this something you can see working
Yeah.
in the text?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Which the amendment would be,
yeah,
reduce the.
yeah,
to
please state it, please state it for me.
Within 50 feet of a residential district, the maximum height is 3 stories, not 3.5 as proposed.
Yes.
That's simple, okay. Councilor Weir, you have your hand up?
I also, for me, you know, design is very important, and the opportunity for different design, different roof types, and I think what is being proposed with the flat, with incentivized flat roofs. And personally, like a well-designed, pitched roof and the additional setbacks that we have to protect, massing along residential areas, I think works well now when we just added more restrictions this evening. I don't see why we should do that. I don't like going from 3.5 to 3 and getting a flat roof.
So 3.5 stories is 56 feet tall. Can be 56 feet tall. And that would be 15 feet from the lot line. Right now, we allow only a third
The
of feet from
56
15.
feet would not be 15 feet because the top floor would have to be an additional 10 feet set back. So the additional height would be 25 feet back.
Okay.
Yeah, so you would take 14 feet off of that.
Or 12 feet, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You could have between 40 and 45 feet, 15 feet from the lot.
And they're still assuming commercial floor to floors, which are probably unlikely.
So I'm, just wanted to say where I think I'm gonna come down on this. I think I'm more interested in setbacks and how the setbacks work to residential districts. I think we have a little more discussion to have on that. Then I think things are already working to step down. If we're requiring on the rear property line toward a residential, either a half story, which is not gonna be a pitched roof, it's more likely gonna be the 10-foot setback that we just agreed to, then we've already got that stepping down happening. So I'm not inclined to support this. I would like to see where we go with the setbacks. It's just where I am.
I'm actually sympathetic to that.
Okay.
Because I'm not wild about this incentivizing flat roofs either, but I am concerned about the impact on the, and maybe the setback is something we want to.
Okay.
But
Council Ray?
So the thing is, I think we're requiring in the zone that the top floor, when it's abutting residential in the back, has to be stepped back anyways. So that's promoting a flat roof, at least from the back, instead of a pitched roof.
Well, no, it has to be a half story, which could either be a pitched roof or the 10-foot step back.
Okay.
The way it's currently written.
Okay.
The same as on the other side.
Okay, okay.
So wouldn't also regulating, the impact of any higher massing by setbacks also help us to maybe add more green space as well as another? There would be
Quite possibly, it could be a roof deck or a
Roof deck,
or a
trees and.
roof, or, it could be all kinds of things, yeah.
Right.
We're
distance from
already
building
stepping
to
it down.
building as well.
Yeah.
That offers you, the more distance, you have more opportunity for lawn, green space, trees.
Oh, if we substitute setbacks for
Yeah.
step downs.
And that's what
yeah.
you just said, wasn't it?
Yeah, it is what I just said, what I wasn't thinking about.
So I'm gonna just simplify that, I'm gonna withdraw the amendment, but it has to be revisited in the context of setback.
Okay.
But I don't withdraw my amendment.
Well, that's the setbacks.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Which
later.
is coming up,
Okay.
because you submitted that as part of the dimensional standards for sites, and if you didn't, I maybe
Okay, the
adjusted it.
amendment is withdrawn.
I didn't.
Councilor Baker has the right and may
But it is
bring
the
it up
second
again.
one, because it's relating to setbacks.
I was looking at it.
Okay.
Yeah. It could be either.
Mr. Doringer, I'm moving right along here, wants us to think about requiring that the additional protections for abutting a residential district apply when a residential district is across the street or right of way. And we understand that very few streets, including the city right of way, are less than 50 feet.
Right, plus you have the 10-foot step back along the front, right?
So let's say we have, just wanna fill this out. Well, I'm gonna ask, Mr. Doringer, would you like to speak to this?
Sure. I think it's actually a question, I saw it much more as a question of the definition of the word abut. And all the protections that are established, that are connected with the 50-foot spacing between BC 2 and 3 lots in residential areas are based on the concept of the lot lines abutting,
Right.
touching one another. And when I was looking at through the maps, there were occasional places where VC3 lots were directly across the street from a residential area. I didn't know really how wide the street was, but because all the protections for the transitions from the VC2 and 3 to the residential areas were described in terms of direct abutment. And I wanted to make sure that if they were on opposite sides of a roadway, that did not negate the protections that were anticipated if the lots were literally abutting.
Go ahead, please.
Well, I can just, because it is a question, I spoke with Inspectional Services. Inspectional Services does not interpret across a street or on the other side of a right of way as abutting. So they would not be afforded those protections. However, at a minimum between front lot line and lot line across the street, usually the smaller streets are 40 feet. And then, that residential property on the other side has a front setback of probably, 20 to 25 feet. So, from the front lot line of the across the right of way to the front of the building, you're probably talking at a minimum of, 60 to 65 feet. But yes, to answer your question, across the right of way, it's not abutting.
Yeah, and I think we see it differently because it's not, when you have lot line to lot line, right? You're talking about there is going to be a building within a portion of that. You have a setback of 15 feet or whatever it ends up being, and then you do have a building, we're just restricting the height. Here you've got at least probably 40 feet, but often 70 feet of no building, and then you have the building across the street. So it's a very different context. I would be worried about what designs we would get if you ended up with 5 or 10 feet or whatever that fell within the 50 feet that you had to drop the height and then step up and then step back. And I don't know that it's necessary.
Thank you, Councilor Wright.
So I'm somewhat concerned with this. I'm looking more at Newton Corner because then they have these small Thornton Place and the houses are 10 feet off of Thornton Place and they're abutting VC3.
Yeah.
And they're gonna be in shadows all the time if there wasn't so much, more space. In Thornton Place itself, I didn't measure that distance, but that I think is roughly 25 feet wide. So you got less than 40 feet from the lot line, and that would be a side lot line for that VC3. And they wouldn't have any setbacks, so I'd be worried about that.
So, I mean, you saw that Maria and I also put it on the maps that we're discussing about changing some of those VC3s to VC2 in Newton Corner. And I also went through all your addresses the other night and looked at them where they were. And so quite a few of them are already ones where we're saying that should be VC2. So your point is well taken.
And then unfortunately for the people, and there's a lot of them, I think I counted a while ago and it was the previous map, like 26 or 28 residential use lots that are abutting VC3. Some of them are across these small roads, but then there's other people who get really screwed because it's residential use, but it's a BU district, so they don't get any.
I'm gonna stop
anything.
this right now.
Okay, I'm
because
sorry.
We're moving too far
Yeah.
into the maps and we're not even halfway through the text. So, and I know there's a real incentive to wanna go into the maps, but what I'm hearing, Mr. Doringer, you had a question, but I think we're gonna try and address these odd situations when we have our mapping discussion.
Yes, I think that will probably take care of it. What I was partly thinking about this from the perspective of a developer who could say, perhaps, that, I'm not, my lot is not abutting against the residential zone across the street from me. And that would mean perhaps literally, that all the protections that are described in terms of abutment would not apply.
Correct.
Go ahead.
Well, I thought that just as there's a need for, a minor language change to recognize that if there are intervening roads, so that when a VC3 and a residential zone are across one another on
Yeah.
that.
We're having trouble hearing you, Peter.
Sorry.
Speak into the microphone.
How's that?
That's better, yeah.
Okay, good. Get closer to my mic. So, as long as the outcome is that that appropriate spacing occurs, so that the protections that are now listed on with the language saying that when the lots abut, you get these special setbacks and step downs and so forth, that the concept of abutment of abutment in all the places where the special provisions apply, that those same provisions apply even if there is a roadway separating the two lot lines.
Okay, I think we hear that, but I think you're not proposing an amendment, specific amendment, because we really can't at this moment. I think we need to go to the
So
maps.
there is a specific language proposal, but in my letter, I believe.
Oh, could I ask planning, what should we do with that? I don't have that.
Well, it was again, so the question was, does abutting, the term abutting or abut include across the street? It does not.
It does not.
And so if that was the case, that when we say that, there's additional setbacks or additional height reductions abutting a residential district, this would probably go into the design standards and say that inclusive of rights of ways or things like that when abutting.
So before, I'm sorry.
And the recommendation from the planning department would be to not do that.
Okay.
Because again, in almost all instances, the right of way of it in and of itself is 40 feet. The buildings on the other side have an additional front setback. So you're gonna be 50 feet away in almost all cases. There are a few instances where that may not be the case, but again.
Plus the sidewalk setback. So Thornton is very tight. However, where we're proposing for VC3, there's not a 12-foot sidewalk, it looks like existing. So you are gonna be setting that building back further. So you're talking about, in the worst case, probably a few feet that the front of the building has to be shorter. And that's where I think you're just gonna get funny design solutions.
So I'm gonna suggest that we're not gonna take this up as a textual amendment right now. Let's wait and see how we go through the maps, and if we can, we've got some odd situations on our maps because we have odd lots and odd adjacencies today in Newton. So I'd love to get through some more of these.
Just a quick question, so is those sidewalk required when, that wouldn't be the front of the building, it'd be the side of the building, and it's not a public way? Like Thornton Place, or it's a private, is it a private?
It's a right of way, we don't care if it's public or private.
Okay, so you need a 12-foot, okay.
Okay, good.
So as long as it's not a problem, I'm happy to withdraw the proposal.
Withdraw, well, you don't have to withdraw the question, but I guess
No,
there's an
only the
amendment
proposal.
only if we can't resolve it through the maps. So we're not gonna, everybody can bring up amendments again. Hope many fewer, but anyway. Okay. We actually are.
I have one more in there.
Sorry?
I have one more in that section.
I'm not seeing another one, but you know what? I'm working from a distilled list that was attempting to be inclusive. So tell me what your amendment is. Your shrunk
Okay.
goes in dimensional standards
Yep.
buildings.
Yep.
Okay.
I'll read what I wrote. I'm concerned the MBTA Act zone units would not be large enough for families. I would like to add in these zones in the MBTA counted areas that the average size for units is 1,000 square feet. Presently, the developer can make any size, including very small units, which are not conducive to families, because I think overall we want family units.
the law is very explicit on this
cannot
point,
do that.
that we may not do this.
Okay, so right now, we require 1,000 square feet per unit, lot size per unit, so to figure out how many units you can have. And it ends up indirectly coming out to a roughly an average 1,000 square foot per unit, less,
Lot
but it's
size,
bigger.
Totally
So-
different.
I know,
Lot
but
area
it
unit
does.
is very different. What the MBTA model uses is an average of 1,000 square feet, which includes common areas, circulation, et cetera. So we cannot do it and be in compliance with MBTA community.
I mean, my concern is, the whole idea is family units. So even though we're
Part
gonna
of the idea.
rezone all this, we may not get any, or very few family units.
We need all types of units. So I think family units, yes, but that's not the entire idea. There are certainly other types of units that are needed. But the short answer is we cannot do it and be in compliance with MBTA communities.
Okay, I'll withdraw it.
All right, thank you. Counselor?
I was just gonna, well, then it's withdrawn now, but I was just gonna say that, if anything, I think we need more smaller units,
We need everything.
because.
But we may not do it.
And we
Yeah.
want a diversity of housing
Yeah, right.
types. And there are micro units being proposed that are coming up before land use on Tuesday that are like 300 square feet and 600 square feet, which is kind of neat. We've never had that before.
Okay,
All over New York City.
we are
We don't want to-
in the next section, which actually goes from the bottom of the first page to the top of my second page, which is full. So, just saying, there's quite a bit more. I'm hoping we can at least focus well until 10:30. I would go later just to get through this, but if we can really focus and try not to go astray again, that would be great. We are now in dimensional standards for sites. So setbacks are, all kinds of proposed amendments for setbacks are in here. I'm gonna go by the zone. And so,
So maybe one of these we could just get rid of
which one do you
early.
want? Tell me the number.
In this list, 23, it's the last one. I think this is from Council Wright to require the increased setback protections, not just, you mentioned this, abutting residence districts, but also abutting residential uses.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to ask Attorney Lee to weigh in on this one, but there's a
Okay, yeah,
legal
Dave.
issues with this.
Right, okay, so to say that again, I don't know if everybody gets that, it's to require increased setbacks, not just for VCOD lots, abutting residence districts, but also abutting where there are
Residential uses.
abutting residential uses,
What is
meaning
that?
residential uses that are in a business zone.
Yeah, BU, and then again, Newton Corner has a
Okay.
lot of those, and
Okay.
that's, and especially VC3 abutting those, and so that's very tall buildings.
They already might not always stay.
Well, it's gonna be a lot more
uses.
tall.
Right, so we are gonna call on the law department to speak to this first, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we looked at this proposal with regards to basically what it's doing is saying that a particular lot, the dimensional requirements are dependent on the use of an adjacent lot. It has nothing to do with the district of the adjacent lot like you were discussing before with regards to setbacks. The problem is that violates the predictability requirement for zoning. Essentially what that means is that whatever someone is doing on an adjacent lot by right will change what dimensional requirements are going to be imposed on the subject lot that's being developed. And because of that, the law department, we looked at it and determined that this would be an inappropriate zoning requirement. Again, what we're saying is not appropriate in this situation is requiring certain dimensional requirements that is solely based on just what the use of the lot next door is.
Okay, so when there's a legally non-conforming use, but it's a business district, we can't, you're saying we cannot treat that specially just because of the use.
We couldn't require certain dimensional requirements simply based on the use of the adjacent lot.
Got it, okay. Council Wright, go ahead.
Can those people who are in the use of a home in a BU lot and even though they probably won't conform to a MR lot, can they request to change their zoning in their lot from BU to MR?
Anybody can request a change, but then that would come up as a separate item, of course.
Is it hard to do, I mean, or is it pretty
Yeah, I
simple?
would say it's pretty hard, but
Well,
you know.
we just had one request, postponed once and then chartered.
Yeah.
And a very reasonable request
Yeah.
by many of our,
And
by
that's a-
this committee
And that's a
standards.
very odd lot
Yeah.
that deserves some special
Yeah.
consideration.
So, that, I know that the one area you're thinking of in West Newton, we're all familiar with now, because there's been a specific request to downzone that area, or do something like this.
I'm thinking more Newton Corner has a lot
but-
more of this.
The planning department has pointed out, or we don't have to have the planning department point out, those have been business zones forever.
Yeah.
And so the expectation was that commercial development would happen there. But before zoning, it didn't,
But
you know.
But before it was 2.5 stories, for now, it could be 80 or 90 stories.
Understand, but I think,
Okay.
I think
There
there's.
cannot be 80 or 90
Yeah,
stories.
yeah, yeah.
For the record.
Well, we have signs around Newton showing 8 and 10 stories, which we can't do either, so,
Yeah.
you know.
And it could have been 60 to 80 stories for significantly longer.
And before zoning, we could have had 100 stories, but
So,
didn't happen.
yeah.
Anyway, so, nice to have a little levity, but we've heard from the law department.
Okay.
We
I
withdraw
withdraw.
this amendment, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So now, let's take up MRT first. MRT is sometimes mixed with VC1. The first two, I'll read them both, because they're both mostly about the MRT district, unless we bring VC1 back. They're both from Council Wright. One is to increase the front setback in the MRT and VC1 zone to 25 feet or the average on adjacent properties, right? From 10 feet or average. And the second one is for the side setback, to increase the side setback in the MRT zones when abutting MRT zones are residential districts, but when abutting a residential district from 7.5 feet to 12.5 feet. Planning?
Well, for the first one, the MRT zone is meant to be a transition zone. So in that case, our current SR and MR districts, a lot of them for their front setback, it is 25 feet. We know from the pattern book exercises and kind of just walking around that these areas that are close into our village centers very often don't have 25-foot front setbacks. And so if you're thinking about, similar to what we were saying before, about the height of going from X to Y to Z, I think we're trying to find a happy medium, right? We're trying to say, in the core of the village centers, the front setback is 0. In the residential districts, it's 25. So in the MRT, which is, again, this transition zone, it's 10 feet. We're trying to that's where we're trying to thread the needle there. For the side setbacks, we're really matching what is allowed in SR2, SR3, MR1, MR2, and MR3 right now. It's 7.5 feet. And so what we're saying is this is also allowed to be 7.5 feet. I know there's lots of complaints about new construction, new 2 families, new things going up 7.5 feet from the property line. Those are much bigger footprint, much bigger mass buildings than the 1,500 square footprint that is allowed in MRT. So again, we're trying to match, and then we're trying to set the median when it comes, or the in-between point when it comes to the front. That's the recommendation.
So what I wanna see, so most of the front setbacks are 25, 30, 40 feet in these zones now.
Front setbacks?
Front setbacks, yep. In MR2, it's 25 feet, SR2 and SR3 are 30 feet, and SR1, 40 feet. Right now it says.
We don't have any SR1 in this, so just.
Yes, there is, and,
We have SR1?
It's a
in Woburn.
fraction of a percent.
Yeah, it's small, but it is in Woburn, and they're way back, so, it's 10 feet or average. I think it should be, the closest it can be is average. or 10 feet. I mean, I don't wanna see the houses are 20 feet back and all of a sudden you gotta tear down and it's 10 feet from the street. That's not what we want. We wanna keep the streetscape. So I think it's more important to keep the average. Now, if that street is all 10 feet, I can understand it, but if it's 20 feet, you're giving this difference. So which one rules, the 10 feet or the average? Because you say 10 feet or average.
You can have it as whichever is less, right?
I think it should be whichever is more.
I think we have it however it's set now. We're not,
Right.
which is whichever is less.
Whichever is less.
So, if the average is 20 feet and 10 feet is less, that means it can be 10 feet. But we wanna keep our streetscape. I mean, that's the whole idea. We want more reuse and things like that, you know, and we're adding on to these houses and we're putting it behind. So I think it should be 10 feet or average. I would prefer 25 feet or average, whichever is greater.
Less of a setback gives more space in the back to.
But the new construction is a small footprint, maximum 1,500 square feet.
Yeah.
So, Director Heath?
Yeah, this is just a simple urban design question, whether or not on your street, you want houses set back further from the street, or you want them a little closer to the street to establish that street wall. And I think Zach is saying that in these districts, it's probably more appropriate to have more of a street wall that's a little bit closer to the street. It has more of a feel of you're in a different place. And it's not necessarily a bad thing.
It isn't necessarily, but I'm gonna just throw darts, okay?
Sure.
So I understand Councilor Wright's point though, and I think we need to discuss this. We are very much trying to incentivize adaptive reuse in this district on the one hand. And, you know, there's going to be an occasional, or maybe, you know, some percent of homes that are not desirable to renovate, you know, the ranch house in the middle of the Victorians that hasn't been taken care of, or whatever it is, right? So that'll be a new construction, but only those will have this opportunity to come forward on the site, and we're only allowing really small footprints for the new construction. I'm just thinking of the whole picture of the metrics, right? And for the adaptive reuse, we're only allowing rearward additions. We're allowing a front porch and dormers and changes to the front like that, but we're not moving the building, right? Nobody's gonna do that. We're trying to, so if the intention in an area was to, over time, rebuild the whole thing, as opposed to incentivizing adaptive reuse, of course, it's gonna play out differently on different streets. But if you're trying to create a street wall, which makes perfect sense in VC2 and VC3 in the core business districts, you know, which is exactly what you're doing. 12-foot sidewalks, 12-foot sidewalks, 12-foot sidewalks. And we are modifying the public way somewhat by doing that in some places. But I don't know, I mean, I think of Lincoln Street and Newton Highlands, let's take that example. You know, bringing those Victorian homes and large colonials, you know, having all of a sudden one, and I can think of maybe 3 buildings on that street that are in really rough shape, where somebody might wanna take them down rather than restore them, because they're really, really rough shape. You know, all of a sudden you'd have 10 feet. So I'm actually, maybe we need to compromise here somehow.
I mean,
Yeah.
you could make it 15 feet, which is again is closer to the 25 feet. Again,
And is that
most of the conditions vary. We don't, you know, again, especially when we're not trying to just match a condition. Again,
I know.
where most of the condition exists.
Yeah.
We're trying to create, so I think you're providing the opportunity for that. And I think a lot of times they will. So I think you could say 15 feet or average. But again, we're trying to create a transition from a 0-foot lot line in the center, 25 feet in the residential beyond, and the MRT in the middle, splitting the difference.
I get it, but I think you also hear there's a little bit of conflicting objectives here.
My question would be,
That's
what's
up
the
to you
goal?
guys.
Yeah, I know.
Do we want, as Councilor Wright is saying, do we want to maintain an even, streetscape? And that seems to me a good goal.
I would probably say in the MRT zone, a kind of range of evenness. I don't think this, is a
But
bad
it doesn't
thing.
have to be a street wall like everything the same.
No.
But
It
some
doesn't-
streets are
exactly
really
right.
set back. I think Highland, on one side of Highland in Newtonville is way set back, but there's other ones that are very close. And I can understand, so doing the average makes sense, average,
Well, it's also topography over parts of the city,
Yeah.
that, you can't build on the front because it's too steep, that sort of thing.
Or this ledge.
Yeah. Councilor Baker, are you thinking the same something?
Yeah, well, I'm sympathetic to the point of view that you've been articulating, and I guess this is one of those places where the two objectives actually are in tension with each other, because I can see, in the center, you're trying to have the street wall, but part of why I think we've heard citizen concern or resident concern about what we're doing is a worry that this becomes a much more urbanized residential feel in places where it isn't appropriate. Now, what that means in terms of the setbacks, I'm not quite sure, but I guess I'm sympathetic to the point of view of making them a little deeper in the front in order to preserve that sense of, because in fact, that is, while it's private space, it feels a little bit like the public space because it's set back.
Preserve the sense of what, Lon?
Of setback, of a deeper front lawn. I grant you, you're trying to make the transition, I understand that. But if I had to err, I think I'd err on the side of a deeper sense.
Well, what about 15 feet? Instead of 25? I mean, there are districts that require only 15 feet.
It does, but there are streets, Lincoln, and there's proposal to put Lincoln as MRT, and I think those are much more than 15.
I was just thinking about Herrick Road that we were looking at, those houses are all set back pretty significantly. And that's supposed to go to MRT.
So it's hard, and MRT is going way into the neighborhoods now, so it's not a
And
one
the
size
front porch
fit
can
all.
go in the setback?
The front
The
porch can
open
go,
porch
the
can
front
go in the
porch can go
setback.
into the setback.
So that's nice, that actually helps encourage front porches,
Yes.
otherwise they'll be on the street.
Mhm.
If you have just 10 feet, if you have 15 feet, it's better. But, or 20 feet.
Vote for the
Go for 20?
or vote for 15.
I like the smallest.
You can go for it.
I'll put 10 on 20.
If 30 feet gets us out of here, right?
Well, what have I
Okay,
bid
guys.
for? Going on, here we are in auction. But-
All right,
I mean, if you could do 20 or average, whichever is greater, or you could do 15 or average, whichever is greater.
20 or whichever is less is how I would do it.
Yeah,
I
it would have to
would
be
20.
whichever is less.
Yeah, I don't like greater because it's requiring that you survey other parcels.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because
Whereas
then
less you could choose to use that.
So then do 25. Or average.
less?
Well, I'm not gonna vote for 25.
No, I wouldn't vote.
I would vote for 20, and because the front porches can be within the setback, so that actually helps to promote that as a feature, which I think is a really nice feature in the community building feature, so forth. So you decide how do you want it to go forward
I'm
first?
gonna go to 20 and
We can put it out as 20, because I think that'll pass. I'm gonna abstain because I'm gonna collect data to see what number, if that's a reasonable number or not.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but I think I'll pass at 20, and so, yeah.
Okay, so the proposal is to increase the front setback in MRT and VC1, which is maybe irrelevant, but that's okay, to 20 feet or average, whichever is less. Okay? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Counselor Crispin, was that an aye grunt?
Yeah, it was a fine aye, yep.
Got it, okay.
And I'll abstain.
And one abstention, so 7 in favor. I think I heard you too, yeah, okay.
Okay, side setback.
Side setback,
Okay, can I just talk about that real quick?
Yep.
So right now, we've had the side setback since the 1950s of 7.5 feet for most of it, but nobody's really built to the side setback until the past 10 years. And that's one of the biggest complaints we hear about all the time, is being built on top of each other. And if you have two houses with 7.5, which is 15 feet between them, there's really no space for nice trees and, decent green space in that. And because the builders are building to the side setbacks, I'd like to increase it, to make them bigger, so you have more room for trees.
planning,
You're comparing the current zoning, which doesn't have any minimum footprint requirement, and the footprints are much, much larger, to what the MRT is proposing. It's just not a one-to-one comparison. The 7.5 feet is what's allowed in the underlying zoning. If you don't match that, you're just gonna get bigger footprint build, you're gonna get everything more that what people don't like already. And we talked about this already with reducing setbacks and changing to, remember, you and Councilor Baker came forward with, proposals to make the new construction, the new lot setbacks, and it didn't do anything. So we're kind of in a similar boat here, and I just would not recommend this change.
So I think there is a docket item, I think, President Albright had it, or to take a look at the
the
setbacks.
underlying zoning.
Zoning, yeah.
Right.
Underlying zoning, that's a different issue though, that's trying to make the underlying zoning less competitive with what we're putting down here, because we want this, we don't like what happens in our underlying zoning.
Okay.
So,
I think Zach has a good point there that they are related. I'm not super worried about the setbacks in MRT because the footprint is so limited that you're going to end up with a good bit of extra space on the lot, just because it is a pretty small footprint. But making it less competitive against the underlying zoning is a concern. So if you are going to do something like increase the setbacks here, it's even more critical that the underlying zoning, I think, gets amended, because you're just sort of tipping the scale towards the underlying zoning.
So the issue I see with the side setbacks and having it small, and I agree with that part, if we could not subdivide a lot, but if you have a corner lot that's 13 or 14,000 square feet, they can make 3 lots in there, and the buildings will be right on top of each other. And because you're taking up now more of the total lot, because now you have 3 buildings.
And they'll be significantly more affordable than anything that's being built now.
go ahead, I have Councilor Ryan and then.
I'm sorry.
I just got a quick question, we're just talking about MR right now, no, that's not.
MRT, yeah.
Alright.
Councilor Baker?
So I understand the department's point of view about the choice, but I would rather have the choice ultimately be, we fix the other end. I'd like to say, what do we think is good urban design? And it seems to me, granted, you can get more units in that model, but again, I think that's more than I'd like to see happen on the site. I'd rather set the policy for what we want and then make sure that the competitive zoning is amended to match, rather than try and make the competitive zoning and then still leave this in the right place where we don't want it. So I'm happier with an increased setback. I'd rather have, what is your proposal, 10 feet, or is it?
12 and a half.
12 and a half.
But I could do 10 also.
Too much though, yeah.
I think if you would amend it to 10, I think we might get somewhere, because I think that's a better model for, it doesn't, it gives a little more breathing room, because I think that's really important here.
You guys,
10? Is that?
I propose 10?
Yep, propose 10.
You could. I think you're gonna get a 10-foot, at least on one side, because there's gonna be a driveway.
More than that, yeah.
More than that.
More than that, because you have a small footprint. So, I think we can do this, just to move along. Are we good? Do we want to, increase the side setback in MRT? I don't know when abutting a residential district means. Is this?
Well, sometimes.
It is a residential district.
Sometimes you.
Generally.
Okay, yeah, in general, yeah.
In general, so we
Yeah.
want to increase the side setback in MRT
Mhm.
to 10 feet.
Yep.
The side setback requirement in the MRT zone to 10 feet from a property line. Okay. So, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Counselor Krinsman? Are you there?
Aye.
Alrighty, it's unanimous, thank you. I have one more on this page, but it's not quite 10:30.
I know, but I said I was gonna leave it in.
We could at least finish the page. Could we finish the page?
Read it out, is it a fast one? I'll just say yes or no.
I think it is.
Vote on all of them at
but
once.
Here we go. Let's just vote on page 2. All those in favor? Okay. This one is also from Counselor Wright. It is asking to change the side and rear setbacks for all VC zones, 1, 2, 3, to half the building height or 15 feet, whichever is larger.
No.
When,
That's what it is now.
when abutting residential districts.
Yes, when abutting residential.
When abutting, that is not in here.
I'm
When
sorry.
abutting residential districts.
Yeah, and that's the way it is now. That's the zoning now.
Okay, hold on, when you say that is the way it is now, you're talking about
The existing
an
zoning.
existing zoning,
BU
right?
zoning.
I'm sorry, the existing BU zoning.
Yeah.
BU 1 and 2 says that?
Yep.
BU 1 and 2 says that?
Yep.
It's only a 2-story allowed, okay.
So the front setback.
No side, or side and
Oh,
rear.
it's the side and the rear.
And MU4 has a similar one, it's a little slightly different, but it's very similar.
Okay, but,
That one's a max of 20, right?
Yeah,
yeah, planning, so, okay, if it includes the phrase when abutting a residential district, and you think of VC2 and VC3, which,
And
we already have some
We have
step-down requirements.
Yes, yeah.
We have a,
And right now, there's a 15-foot setback to a residential district from either VC2 or VC3, I'm not sure, VC1 also. Okay, the ghost district now. So the proposal here is to make it greater than 15 feet because you go up to half the building height, which sounds like 25 or 30 feet.
it sounds like, yeah, a lot.
in here, we do have this in the BU zones, however, the height's a little simpler there. Cause you don't have half stories, you don't have step downs. So I would say just for implementation purposes, setting just one clear number would be much easier, because what height are we using? Are we using the total height, are we using the peak if it's a pitched roof, are we using the step down portion? So I would say just set a number, if you want that number to be greater than 15.
So-
set a number greater than 15.
so right now, and we were talking about before being just 3 stories, and 3 stories within 15 feet of the residential area, 3 stories would be 44 feet. So right now, we're saying 44 feet, 15 feet from the lot line, but in our present zoning, that would have to be in 22 feet away. It wouldn't be allowed to be 15. So right now, we're allowing a much higher building, 50% taller, to be within 15 feet of a residential district. Because right now, we allow 30 feet, now we allow 44 feet, so it's about 50% bigger.
I'm in favor, this gets to the point that we were talking about earlier, which I'm sympathetic to, as opposed to putting an additional height limit, making additional step back. So I'm sympathetic to the objective. The question I would just ask planning, if you pick one number as opposed to try and do the formula like the BU, what incentivizing are we doing by picking the peak versus the
I think just set a number, like set 20 feet, set,
Yeah.
you know, instead of saying,
and instead of just saying.
don't tie it to building height is my recommendation.
Okay.
So a 3-story building is a maximum of an 18-foot first floor, and a 12-foot second floor, and a 12-foot third floor.
13 and 13.
Oh, 13 and 13 because of commercial, got it, okay.
So most likely you're gonna get around, you know, maybe 15 to 18 foot ground floor, and then maybe 11 feet for the floors above.
So
then it wouldn't be a problem, but I'm looking at the maximum.
Understood, we're unlikely to see that maximum unless we're getting.
What happens if we set this at 20 feet?
I would be okay with 20.
Okay.
It's
You wanna go home, your daughter's getting up early.
She gets up multiple times overnight. She's got molars coming in right now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's fine.
Yeah, you got some scotch?
My age, they come out again.
All right, folks, all right, we have a proposal to increase the setback from the VC2 and VC3, and if we have a VC1 zone to a residential district from 15 feet to 20 feet. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That was some unconvincing eyes there.
Yeah.
No.
No. And 6, okay. Counselor Crispin, you going with this, or you can say no or abstain?
I think he fell asleep.
Not voting.
You said abstain, can you not hear me?
Abstain, I got two abstentions. Okay, 6 ayes and 2 abstentions. And, you know, so we finished this first page. I'm not sure we have the mindset.
I would like to make a proposal to adjourn.
Okay, next meeting, we are beginning the meeting at 5:30.
But you said there would be beer and sandwiches.
There will be sandwiches. There will be sandwiches and drinks.
I want beer, but then I won't last.
Do we want to try and just finish this substantive section? There's only a couple more here.
I'm out of business, I'm sorry. I gotta get up early.
Okay.
But we're gonna get through the maps really quickly on Monday, so we can also finish this.
We've got a whole page of stuff.
We've got a bunch of things to do, and we can do that, but.
I know. So here's what's gonna happen. We, however far we get, we may not get through all the maps. We are reopening the public hearing, the second meeting in September, and that has to be probably renoticed, especially if we're changing from 4 districts, 4 sub-districts to 3 sub-districts, but, you know, it has to be renoticed. And it's going to be renoticed anyway, so we want to be as close to what our final version is as possible. And that has to happen 2 weeks before, which is kind of the same day as our first September meeting. Where we can continue to deliberate over the maps and just, you know, get ourselves in shape for the final, but we're gonna be reopening the public hearing in September, renoticing it and doing that for the second meeting in September. I don't think there's any way to have 3 meetings in September. So the upcoming meeting, starting at 5:30 and going till probably the same time, with a break and a sandwich, and that's where we are.
Maybe dessert, but never mind.
And lots of chocolate.
But are we going to start with finishing up this month? Okay, before we get to the maps. Yeah.
So, what I think I'm gonna do is, we're gonna send the list of what else we have on this to the committee members to prepare. And what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna talk with Zach about which ones we combine, and Jen and everything, because there are similar.
And there's a
as
couple
we went
of-
through everything, you know, some things are quite similar or related, and we'll try to bank
I've
them.
got a minimum lot size in there.
And there's a couple that law has weighed in that we cannot do as
There's a
well,
couple
so
we can't do.
So we can highlight those
Yep.
as well.
I mean, things like, there's a couple things. So I could even talk with the makers of them. In the meantime, maybe we wind up withdrawing them because we know. Or, you know, adding craft beverages in, for example, we haven't passed that yet. If we pass it, fine, if we don't, so we'll take some things off the list, but not enough things. So we got, yeah, all right, so we'll do a little work, to make it simpler. okay?
Oh. Should we ask Josh if he can grace our presence if he wants a sandwich?
I think, Josh, you know, we all signed up for a sandwich.
Oh, good.
We hope that you're gonna be in the room next time, because we're gonna be looking at maps. Is he still there?
I am still here.
There you
I
go.
apologize for not being in the room tonight. We have
So
family in
how-
town that I was here for.
Counselor Ryan's exact words were, are you going to grace us with your presence at our next meeting? And if so,
The short answer, oh, sorry, my video's not on. I didn't realize that. The short answer is, I don't even know if I'll be here on time, because I think I told you, I don't know that I can make 5:30. And I'm probably going to be late. So late, I can try and get to City Hall, but I'm probably not gonna be there by 5:30. I have to be in Rhode Island all day.
I don't know, we're gonna eat sandwiches after we work for a while,
Yeah,
right?
I think we.
Yeah, we're gonna work for a while, and then we're gonna eat sandwiches, so if you're coming, you need to order a sandwich.
I can look at that, yeah.
Okay.
That's it. Everybody online, thank you for joining us this evening. It's been a scintillating conversation. I hope you have enjoyed yourselves and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Enjoy is kind of a strong word.
Yeah, I know. Thank you, everyone.
Drip a little water on our forehead before